Dr. Adams, what are you looking for? Is anything that's a triggering point for you tonight that you're looking for as a sign of anything one way or the other?
Yes, I think I'm looking for the statewide races because we've seen what many people have called the Trumpification of Texas politics, and to see how the endorsement that Trump made, to see how it plays, to see whether or not Texas has become a bellwether in terms of what may occur in the nation. Also looking at the congressional seats, because clearly we've seen a lot of outside money come into the state of Texas in terms of national money versus local races. I think in Congressional District 38, that's going to be very important because Wesley Hunt has received most of his money from outside of the state, and some people don't like that. So we'll see how that plays.
And we've got all night to talk about this. Dr. Ridinghouse, I'll talk to you in a second, but I want to get to the NBC correspondent, because with the polls just closing, we want to get to NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton. She's been at the Metropolitan Multi-Services Center on West Gray Street all day long. It's one of the busiest voting locations in the state. How was it today, Antonia?
Well, it's been pretty active here all day long. Just as you mentioned, the polls just closed, but there are still folks in line behind me here. So this is going to be an active scene still for a while tonight. On the Republican side, people have been actively talking about what you folks were just talking about there. You know, the continued hold former President Trump has over the GOP and whether his favorites are going to rise to the top tonight. On the Democratic side, a lot of the voters that I've talked to here tonight are really concerned about voting rights. They're concerned about SB 1 and the change to the election. In particular, I spoke to older voters who were talking about challenges with mail-in voting. Now that the law required people to submit identification numbers that had to match what they sent in when they first registered to vote, which has proved to be very challenging for some, particularly elderly voters here in Harris County. And so I spoke to people who had direct experience with that and have spoken to the elections administrators who say that they're still worried about the thousands of rejections that they saw during the early voting period, and they're worried that folks didn't come by today to get their ballots cured. And so that is a major question we're going to be watching for now that the polls have been closed and people are going to start counting votes soon. Were people who potentially lost out on the chance to have their voices heard during that early voting and mail-in voting period, did they come and ultimately get their voice heard, their ballots in? That is going to be one of the most interesting questions for us to watch tonight.
You have hit on a lot of the high points. What is it about Texas? It seems to grab the attention of the nation. You're here, a lot of other networks focusing their eyes on what goes on in Texas. What is it about Texas that seems to get the attention of the nation?
Look, this is the first primary of the 2022 season. So in some ways, people are looking at Texas right now to get a sense of the winds of change, what is going to come over the next several months throughout the rest of the country. And then just in general, Texas is an incredibly influential state in politics, in education. And those are issues that are top of mind for many of the voters here. I mean, after people were talking about voting rights, they were talking about issues of public safety here in Texas, issues around education that have been battled out in all kinds of Texas communities over the last year. And so people are going to be looking at how voters, who voters supported, what issues voters have been talking about today. And they are going to see that as a reflection of not just Texas politics and Texas communities, but actually to try to get a sense of what's to come. And also, of course, you know, tonight is also the night of the State of the Union, and people see a connection between the results here in Texas, the president's agenda, concerns about withering Democratic support for this president, how the midterms are going to shape out for the Democratic Party, and people are going to be looking at Texas to get a hint of all of what's to come.
Reporting on many of the issues in Texas. Very good reporting. Thank you so much on what you've been able to do throughout covering all of the issues. And thank you for joining us for a little bit tonight. I know you've got a busy night ahead as well. Thank you. Antonia Hilton reporting. Hey, President Joe Biden, as she talked about, is giving his State of the Union address tonight live. We know that many of you have multiple screens you can watch. So you can stick with us here at KPRC 2+ or at click2houston.com. while you watch the State of the Union, or you can watch NBC's live coverage of the State of the Union on KPRC2 at 8 o'clock. NBC News Now will also have post coverage breaking down the big moments of President Biden's address. That's the good news about what we do here. We know that you have a place to go, and because we talk politics here, it gives you an option to come in, stay with us, or watch the other events that are going on as well. Let's go back to Dr. Brandon Ridinghouse. We're talking with Dr. Adams earlier. Doc, what are you looking at in terms of the high points? Because as Antonia was saying and Dr. Adams was saying, there's a lot riding on what's going on in this first primary.
There is, yeah. One of the reasons why we see turnout pretty sluggish is that Texas is pretty early in its primary season. So a lot of people just get caught flat-footed. It's sad to say, but we love elections in Texas, but we don't love to vote. So turnout's been a little sluggish. We'll see what today's numbers bring and how that bumps it up or doesn't bump it up. But I think it's interesting because I think, as Dr. Adams said, Donald Trump's influence in the Republican Party has been great, but so has his influence on the Democratic Party. So one of the things I'm watching for is whether or not you've got a kind of progressive juice that has any kind of real traction. So we're seeing that here locally in Senate District 15. You've got a spirited challenge to Senator John Whitmire from Molly Cook. We're seeing this down south in the southern part of the state where you've got in Congressional District 28, Jessica Cisneros, who's challenging Henry Cuellar, who's had some ethical problems and an FBI investigation that could lead to some potential political problems. You're seeing this way out in El Paso in a House district that basically merged two House districts together. And you've got two progressives running against each other to try to find out who's the more progressive of the two. So there's a lot of things that are happening in the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party is certainly following suit on that too.
Surprised at how it's come down to who can be the farthest to the right? I mean, it's been progressively more to the right. It started out that way. I know that Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst knows very well what happens when you are outrighted, if you will, by Ted Cruz he was. So are you surprised at how much farther to the right this thing is going?
No, I'm not surprised because, again, I think the attempt to appeal to Trump voters, if we look at the gubernatorial race, I think Abbott has moved far, far to the right and tried to block others out of that lane in terms of Huffines. If you've seen some of the advertisement, and also with Allen West, certainly I think that's one race. Clearly, it's been vitriolic in terms of trying to occupy that space, and we see the governor recently come out in terms of transgender kids, in terms of child abuse and these kinds of things. Now, how far more can you go to the right? You have to be to the right of Attila the Hun in the state of Texas to outright that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we're going to be looking to see we're starting to get some results coming in. We'll be showing those to you as we get them. These are from the early voting, and we talk about the very early voting process, and this is Republican, obviously, with Governor Abbott. And this was not really a shock. They expected him to be able to sail through this primary. This is very early, but I don't think anyone's expecting that this to change drastically between now and later on tonight. It's interesting how Allen West, we came out with a lot early on, came out with guns blazing and then just kind of went away. What do you think, Dr. Ridinghouse, what do you think was the deal with Allen West, who came out so forcefully early on and then just kind of disappeared?
Yeah, I think to some degree that, the governor kind of stole his thunder. As Dr. Adams said, you found Greg Abbott moving pretty far to the right during the session. And then after the session, he has certainly put the red meat out on the buffet. So that's one certain factor that definitely took the wind out of the sails for both he and Huffines. And like I said, the primary is really early. It's actually, frankly, like an incumbent protection plan. So any challenger is going to have to start a year or more in advance. And although West was definitely pretty vocal during the session, holding protests outside the governor's mansion, it just wasn't the case that was going to catch on in any significant degree. But Greg Abbott needs this win. He's got to get that 71% number fixed in because he wants to be able to set the stage for his conservative ascendancy. Right. This is the time in a Texas governor's life for Republicans that they're going to get challenges. And so the fact that he was able to survive this is certainly a big feather in his cap.
Right. And on the other side of the ledger, on the Democratic side, of course, Beto O'Rourke has been the guy who's been getting a lot of the attention. Right. It appears that there's really not much of a reason to think that he wouldn't get the nomination. Right. In terms of what you see the other folks who are in the race against him.
You haven't seen much, but I think both the governor and also O'Rourke, basically in terms of you look at the tenor and the tone and the issues, O'Rourke has been talking about the electric grid and these kinds of things. So they both have been moving towards the general election.
Brandon Walker is standing by in Fort Worth, where Beto O'Rourke is preparing to talk after the polls close. I know that was part of the deal, that he said he was going to do that. And Brandon Walker is standing by in Fort Worth now. Brandon?
And Khambrel, good evening to you from Fort Worth, where the stage is set. The band is up there playing. Supporters have gathered, and they are expecting Beto O'Rourke to take the stage any minute now to say hi to everyone. O'Rourke says that this will be a good night. He expects to be victorious, and analysts say that if he does move forward, moving on to the general election, he does face an uphill battle convincing Texans he's a winner following 2 losses.
Hey, good morning. How are you? Good to see you. How's Lisa doing?
O'Rourke this afternoon spoke with supporters in his hometown of El Paso before casting his vote. The campaign party here in Tarrant County, which is primarily a Republican stronghold, and it's being held here because O'Rourke says this county is an example of what can be done, what he has already done. O'Rourke beat Ted Cruz here in 2018, the Senate race, and Joe Biden beat Donald Trump here in 2020. O'Rourke says Texans want change, adding his administration would focus on real issues.
We're focusing on things that really matter, like creating great jobs and improving the quality of our schools and expanding Medicaid so more people can see a doctor. These are things almost all of us can agree on, but we can't get them done unless we turn out to vote.
And there are five candidates in total vying for the Democratic nomination here in the primary election. They're all on the ballot here. Back live in Fort Worth. Again, the band is all set up. They're waiting for Beto O'Rourke to take the stage to say good evening to everyone with polls closed. O'Rourke hoping that this will be victorious. His supporters here tonight saying that he will be. We'll see, Khambrel. Back to you.
All right, you let us know when he takes the stage, and we, of course, will be able to go back to that. That's one of the benefits of doing this kind of wall-to-wall coverage on what goes on. Dr. Rottinghouse, when we look at what Beto O'Rourke has said, I know that the general sense of things is that he's got some things to prove, assuming he gets through this primary, which there's no reason to think he won't, that after having 2 elections where he was on the losing end, that's a challenge going forward in the general election.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the polling really reflects the fact that he's got some ground to make up. I think a lot of people in Texas see him as somebody who's too liberal. That's definitely something he's going to have to remedy because the fight's really going to be in the middle. It's going to be a red versus blue matchup for sure, but both of those teams are going to get their voters out. The meaty middle is where a lot of that fight's going to have to be had. It's also the case that independents don't really like him. He's got a good name ID, but the people who know him don't really like him that much. So that's something that he's going to have to work on. And really the focus there should be on making sure that he's talking about the policies people care about. If this race becomes about the energy grid, if it becomes about Republican policy failures or how they shifted too far to the right to be out of the range of where Texans are, then O'Rourke can do well. But if the race is about immigration, if it's about border security, and if it's about the economy, then it's going to be a lot more hard for Democrats to make inroads, O'Rourke in particular.
So you said something that struck me. You said that polls and things, research shows that the independents don't like him. What is it about him that independents in specific don't like? Or do you have that kind of feedback?
Yeah, I think partly it's because he's to some degree been a kind of known political quantity. When he ran for president, I think it took a lot of the kind of bloom off the rose. People looked at him as an opportunist instead of somebody who was really energetic and electric and able to rally Democrats in Texas. The fact that he didn't use that as an opportunity to run again here in Texas, I think rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. That and the fact that once you're in the public eye, especially as a Democrat, and you're that popular of a Democrat, you're going to have all kinds of knives pointed your way. And that's exactly what happened for O'Rourke, where he wasn't really able to translate that into continual support because you don't have the ground game to make it happen. You aren't really continuously pushing that issue in the state. So those are the kind of political breaks that happen when you're in the opposition party in Texas.
Well, he may have an uphill climb, and of course everybody who's run in statewide offices on the Democratic side have had an uphill climb for a long, long time. But when they get to the point where he can run statewide, he's going to be running against Governor Greg Abbott. And Greg Abbott's headquarters, where he is making his headquarters tonight, is in Corpus Christi, and that's where our Roseanne Aragon is right now tonight, standing by with Governor Abbott's campaign. Ro, good evening.
It is a gorgeous night here in Corpus Christi. I just want to show you this. We are outside the USS Lexington, but this backdrop here is actually at the Texas State Aquarium, where the governor is expected to address voters later tonight. Governor Greg Abbott is expected to win in the primaries today. This is an opportunity, though, for all candidates to get a feel for where voters are at. As polls close, Governor Abbott is expected to have a wide lead over 7 other primary Republican candidates, including former Texas GOP Chairman Don Huffines and former Texas Senator Allen West. Some of the biggest criticism from his opponents, they say Abbott isn't conservative enough. Abbott, though, has been pushing for and signing conservative policies in this second term, including supporting a border wall and signing strict anti-abortion policy. In addition, just last week, Abbott instructed state agencies to consider medical treatment for transgender adolescents as child abuse. We also spoke with voters who tell us what issues matter to them. For Jerry Mulligan, it's the pandemic.
He's done a good job in covering, making the restrictions, but not too tight in order to make everyone safe.
The polls just closed at 7. The stage is set, and we are waiting for the governor to talk, hopefully within this hour. We will bring you the latest from his campaign from here in Corpus Christi. Reporting live from Corpus Christi, Roseanne Aragon, KPRC 2 News.
All right. Thank you, Roseanne. We appreciate it. We'll be back with you tonight as the governor gets ready to speak. And Dr. Adams, we talk about that. She's talking about the momentum that he hopes to have as he goes into this race and running to the right and doing all those kinds of things. Well, it really is a testament to how state politics, you can't go far enough to the right in order to be a part of it. How big of an issue has former President Trump, played in all of this? I call it Trumpublicans that are out there right now that are a lot. I mean, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but quite frankly, the Republican Party that we once knew is not that party anymore in a lot of places, so Trumpublican sounds like it works.
No, it's not the party of George H.W. Bush.
Right.
All right, and the Rockefeller wing of the Republican Party as we knew it. So I think what we've seen in terms of the influence of Trump nationally and all of the other stuff, that you would think that there would be some reckoning after Trump's service in office to say, well, hey, let's come together. And I'm hoping that President Biden in the State of the Union tonight, we can't look at us being against the Republicans supporting Putin or the Democrats being lax on that. We have a lot of issues that we must confront. Mm-hmm. And I think the economy, if back to Beto O'Rourke, clearly has an uphill climb. But you have to talk about the economy, the increase in inflation, and it goes back to 1991 when the Raging Cajun told Bill Clinton to say, hey, it's the economy, stupid. Mm-hmm. And I think if you do that, you will help some other Democrats in the down ballot, whether he wins or not.
Well, I know that what's going on in the state, a lot of it has been influenced by former President Trump, and a lot of that has been with the help of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. I think it's been well known that the lieutenant governor's position in the state of Texas has a lot more power, it seems, than the president. And so what role do you think that lieutenant governor's race, clearly there's not much of an issue with him as far as him being able to retain that position?
Right. We've seen the expansion of the power of Dan Patrick and clearly the closeness to Donald Trump. And he has been the conduit where other politicians at the state and local level have had to go through to get Trump's endorsement. So we've seen an aggrandizement of his power and his influence. And that may be to the dismay of others, because in recent weeks he's come out attacking university professors, tenure, and the like. So, but it is what it is.
Well, and you see the early results from this. There's really never any concern about him being able to be back into the seat to run for the Republican side as lieutenant governor, with only 1% percent reporting, but 77% pretty much shows the story there. Dr. Ridinghouse, your take on the Dan Patrick's power position within the Republican Party, and in fact, as a kingmaker in the state of Texas with the help of former President Trump.
Yeah, Dan Patrick was Donald Trump before Donald Trump was Donald Trump. I mean, he's been pushing a conservative line, especially on immigration issues, since he first ran in 2014. So it's not surprising that he'd be the Trump whisperer here in Texas. But he has been and has really developed into the strongest lieutenant governor the state's ever seen. Typically, lieutenant governors in the state have been pretty much a kind of legislative creatures. They haven't done much politically to kind of advance the party's cause. But Dan Patrick has changed all of that. And he's really bringing friends with him. He's actually shaping the Texas Senate in a way that he's endorsing candidates, which lieutenant governors never did. He's funding candidates, which lieutenant governors never did. And so there's definitely a kind of new sheriff in town. And Dan Patrick is really running a lot of that, of the far right on the Republican Party.
So he has also talked about trying to deal with tenure for college professors about what they can teach and what they can't teach. Got to ask you, you teach politics, you don't teach social studies or anything else like that. Not that, so what are your thoughts about that? I mean, clearly that's kind of like, in many cases, the third rail for people who are across the state in academia.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the cornerstone of academic freedom in this country. And it's the kind of thing that I think that the state doesn't want to mess with. You don't want to have subpar universities. And so this is certainly the case that I think university professors see the value in it. And this is something that keeps universities strong and faculty able to engage. So that's what we need. We need critical thinkers, and we need faculty who are able to get in the classroom and talk about the things that are confronting us as a nation. So if that goes away, then it's a slippery slope that can create all kinds of problems down the road.
So, Dr. Adams, you know that you people when I say you people, I mean you college professors. Then you can't be trusted not to teach critical race theory in college.
It depends. It's just what you teach. If you agree with Dan Patrick, it's okay. All right. If I were at the Hoover Institution, perhaps that would be okay in the state of Texas. All right. It's conservative.
Yeah, well, we'll watch that. We'll see just how this progresses. I know there's going to be a lot of pushback from a lot of quarters on the lieutenant governor about that. The attorney general's race is one that has really attracted a lot of attention. Obviously, the sitting attorney general, Ken Paxton, has been a lightning rod for a lot as he's been indicted and also other things that he's been charged with, or at least accused of at this point. This is Texas Agricultural Commissioner Sid Miller. This is interesting, too, since we popped that up. Let's talk about that. Sid Miller has not exactly been a shrinking violet in his role. He stood out in a lot of different ways. And James White, it was thought that he might be able to make inroads on him in some way, shape, or form. James White is an African-American representative from District 19. And although Sid Miller has been the incumbent, it was thought that with his baggage that has been created with some of the things that he'd been doing, that he would not be able to move forward. Now, this is only 1%. But clearly, does that number surprise you at all, or is it just too early to even think about being surprised?
That surprised me. I thought James White would run better in terms of some of the endorsements. Given the ethical challenges of Sid Miller, I think a staff member or some lobbyist associated with him, he has the right to sell the marijuana license. And certainly there were some ethical issues there where a person had sort of like inside advantage there. And so he has scar tissue as well, sort of like just like our Attorney General.
Dr. Ridinghouse, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm surprised too. In fact, the last time we saw an incumbent ag commissioner lose their election was 1990, and that was Jim Hightower. And some of the scandals involving the people who were selling licenses illegally definitely caught him in a trap, and none other than Rick Perry ended up winning that race. So usually it's the case that these scandals matter. So I'm just not sure they do anymore. It's worth noting that for both Sid Miller and for Ken Paxton, they're both running pretty well, even despite the fact that they've got these ethical issues. But I am actually surprised too for a different reason. That is that the legislature and most Republicans were completely against Sid Miller. In fact, the legislature has done everything they can to strip the ag commissioner of powers that are otherwise given to the ag commissioner because they don't trust Sid Miller, and he kept raising fees and they kept trying to work around that. So in part, James White ran against him because this is something the legislature wanted to do away with. So it's surprising in a way that all of these legislators who have backed James White are not going to get anywhere if this trend keeps up.
Yes.
So Dr. Adams is saying that Sid Miller was endorsed by former President Trump, so that may have been part of the issue there.
Yes.
And it maybe has nothing to do with what kind of issues they have in office. The base, which has determined, and in our state, the base, you can't go far enough to the right, which means that this primary is really what counts in the state of Texas in the statewide election. The process continues. It's a little bit different in Harris County because Harris County makes up a whole different ball game. We'll be talking about all of those things throughout this evening. We got a lot more election coverage coming for you tonight between the House districts that are going on, some of the people that are running in the various positions. Garnett Coleman's retiring, and so there's an interesting race in that position as well. And we're going to look at what's going on in the 8th Congressional District as well, where Kevin Brady has decided to step down. Boy, there's a real skirmish going on there for the battle in that regard. We're going to talk more about that. We'll pick that up after we take a little bit of a break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Also, we may want to look at
Welcome back to our election 2022 coverage here at KPRC. If you're watching online, then you know that we're the alternative viewing for those who are really interested in politics. And we've been talking about a number of things, mostly on the state level up to this point. Now let's talk about Harris County Judge, because that has been something that has been really a craw. That's been really a problem. Republicans have really not liked it since Ed Emmett was defeated the last election cycle. And so, Dr. Adams, let's talk about that for a second, because, you know, Lena Hidalgo was able to take advantage of a Democratic wave. There was a big wave at that point in time. And because there was a tremendous high level of dislike for former President Trump and for Senator Ted Cruz in this market, that's what helped to go ahead and get Ed Emmett defeated, it looks like. But since then, Republicans have really wanted to get that spot back.
Yeah, you have to go back to 2018. We had straight ticket voting then in the general election, and with that wave, and I think Beto O'Rourke and his run against Cruz, and certainly Cruz had a lot of scar tissue and a lot of problems and everything, and so I think that shepherded in certainly a number of Democrats, and we saw the blue wave in Harris County.
Right. Dr. Ridinghouse, your thoughts about the challenge for the Republicans to be able to bring somebody in to go ahead and mount a challenge to whoever the Democratic nominee will be, and there's no reason to believe that it would not be Lina Hidalgo at this point based upon polls that I've seen. Your thoughts? Oh,
Here.
Oh, you lost your sound. I'm not sure why. Did you go mute on us?
I was on mute. Yeah, I think you're right. I think she's got a pretty clear walk to the nomination. Unseating a Democrat in Harris County is going to be nearly impossible. That's not to say that there aren't some cleavages or on some issues where you're going to definitely find some opportunities in terms of issues like crime and maybe kind of fiscal management issues. But it's going to have to be something major in order for the Republicans to make some headway. That said, there's opportunities to be politically stronger in a midterm election where you've got less enthusiasm down ballot and you've got a sour economy for a lot of people and a president who's not very popular. So, in politics as in everything, you've got to pick your time, but this is going to be an uphill battle for Republicans.
So we've got some numbers in, and the numbers coming in now, the numbers that we have are numbers that are related to early voting, not numbers from today. Remember, we always have to know that those numbers come in. This is a Republican primary at this point. And, this is interesting because Alexandra Del Moral Miller, who has come on strong, just very recently, we've seen some advertisements about her. We've seen a lot more scuttlebutt about Martina Lamont Dixon, who is the school board president. Vidal Martinez is someone who has been putting a lot of money. As you see, he's in a lot of airwaves. Your thoughts, Doc Adams, about what you see right now? Very early, but the fact that Alexandra Del Moral Miller, the nominee of Mattress Mac, is leading the way at this point. He has a pretty strong record of when he recommends people, they tend to do well.
Right. I thought Vidal and also Martina Lamont would have a better showing at this point. Certainly, I think Lamont Dixon probably, there was a lot of money may have come from out of state, for example, in those two races. So I'm somewhat surprised there. Right.
So I did read that Martina Lamont Dixon had gotten endorsements from some pretty big names throughout this process. Dr. Ridinghouse, are you surprised at these early numbers, even as early as they may be? Does this tell you anything, even as an early number?
I think it does. I mean, for certain, it tells us that there's just a lot of pent-up demand for Republicans to try to take down the county judge. Her profile isn't just Houston. It's not just Texas. It's national. And so Republicans are definitely anxious for the opportunity to unseat her. I think that the fact that you've got so many candidates in this race certainly split that. So in a way, it's not surprising. I mean, these numbers will solidify a little bit, but I think you're still talking about runoff territory here. And so that's definitely, I think for Republicans at least, a good sign. They're able to field candidates who can carry the Republican Party flag. And so in some cases in the 1990s and 2000s, there were places where the parties just didn't do that. So it's a competitive two-party system, and that's a good sign for democracy, at least.
And I know that we've got early numbers on the Democratic side as well. Of course, we talked about the fact that Lina Hidalgo, there would be no real expectation that anyone would be able to come close to her, and that is certainly the case here. Maria Garcia, Georgia Provost, who runs often in various races. Erica Davis, who comes out of Constable's office and was hoping to make a run. But that number clearly indicates that Democrats are not in a mood to try to change the lead. And that's interesting because when Lina Hidalgo came into play, she was, 26, 27 years old, very early. She's 31 years old now. My math is always bad. But she really has endured a lot of challenges, so young and as a first-time political operative, a first-time political office holder.
Right, and you have to look at the challenges in terms of the county judge being primarily an emergency manager, dealing with the pandemic, dealing with the freeze, for example, and she's been able to do all of these things and done it very well, and I think that's a testament to what we're seeing tonight.
Well, we've got coverage in all of these places. We talked with Brandon and Roseanne Aragon, and Robert Arnold is dealing with this part of the race, talking about Harris County judge race. Robert is reporting from the Harris County Democratic Watch Party. Robert, good evening.
Good evening, Khambrel. How are you? This is going to be the central location for all the Democratic candidates. This is where you're going to have all of the supporters coming in, and you were expecting to see candidates filtering in and out of the area throughout the night. This is, of course, where Judge Lina Hidalgo is expected to be later on this evening. She has not yet arrived. We're hoping to get a chance to speak with her soon. Based on those early numbers, though, it does not appear, at least on the Democratic side, that voters want to make a switch at this time. Those early numbers have Judge Hidalgo with about 69% of the vote on the Democratic side. You talk about a vastly different political landscape. When she ran 4 years ago, she was unopposed on the Democratic ticket. This time, she had 5 members of her own party trying to unseat her, and she still has a large majority based on those very early numbers. Now, after this, we're going to be heading over to various Republican watch parties, including Vidal Martinez, as well as Alexandra Del Moral Mueller's party. It looks like it's going to be a horse race between those two. Now, it's not a surprise that the Republican primary will probably go to a runoff, since you had 9 candidates there. And so as soon as these candidates start coming up, we're going to be able to update our story. Plus, we're going to be watching these numbers throughout the night. Khambrel.
Thank you, Robert. Good to know. At that point, give us an update whenever you have an opportunity. Wave the high sign, and of course, we'll be back to you. Hey, I just got this letter handed to me. This is from the Secretary of State John Scott, who says that the delay in Harris County voting, that the votes will not be tabulated by tomorrow. So under Texas law, I'm going to read this to you. Bear with me. Under Texas law, all Texas counties are required to report early and election day results within 24 hours of polls closing on election night. Today, the Texas Secretary of State's office was informed that Harris County election officials would not be able to count and report results for all early and election day votes by the statutory deadline of 7 p.m. on Wednesday. Texas Secretary of State John Scott issued the following statement: offered assistance to Harris County in ensuring that all ballots are timely tabulated in accordance with state law. He says, we are closely monitoring the progress of ballot tabulation in Harris County to ensure all relevant election laws are followed and that legitimately cast ballots by Harris County voters in both the Democratic and Republican primary elections are counted accurately and timely. Harris County election officials have indicated to our office that the delay in ballot tabulation is due only to damaged ballot sheets that must be duplicated before they can be scanned by ballot tabulators at the central count location. Our office stands ready to assist Harris County election officials and all county election officials throughout the state in complying with Texas election code requirements. So there you go. I mean, it just so happens that once again, there's some sort of election ballot issue in Harris County. This one does not appear to be associated with late voting, right. But nonetheless, that's another black eye about the process in Harris County.
Right. And my response to that would be, if you look at the process, it was a little different. It was sort of like a 2-step. You had to put the ballot, and it's my understanding at some of the locations, the verification sheet, that second step, some of the machines were malfunctioning. And so I don't know what's going on, but certainly I hope that we don't get into a situation like what we saw in Georgia and Arizona in terms of counting and delayed votes.
Was this a new way to do it this time around?
Yes, it was the verification, I think, process. So it was like a second step. You vote, you feed it, and then you feed it back out. You have to go over and verify.
Do we know, Dr. Ridinghouse, that process is something that has been in place across the state, or is that something that's just unique to Harris County? Do you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. This is new to Harris County, but it's not new to the state. Other counties in the state have this optical scan process. And I should say, too, other counties across the country also do it this way. So it's not that new. I think obviously the fact that it's different and new creates complications. I doubt there's anything nefarious here, but I hope, in addition to having these counted fairly and accurately, that it doesn't turn into speculation about what this might mean, that it's some kind of a plot or there's some kind of a problem with how Democrats count ballots in big blue counties, because that's the kind of thing we've seen precipitate the lockdown on voting, and not just in Texas, but nationwide, this concern that these things aren't functionally well. Most of the time when these kinds of things happen, it's just a simple mistake. It's just common errors. We run elections from, human beings. And so that sometimes creates problems. So I'm hoping that this doesn't mean that we're going to see another round of this discussion about how counties can't do this properly and that needs to be centralized at the state level or some other kind of political change.
And Dr. Adams, that kind of goes goes right into the face of what has been put into place over the last 3 years, which was a sense of uncertainty about the electoral process.
Yes.
And how the former president continues to talk about an election that was stolen, which has been proven not to be the case. But the base, and especially those to the far right, they tend to still believe that.
Sure.
And that creates this whole environment. And it sounds to me like this is the worst thing that could happen in this kind of category.
I agree with you that. And certainly we saw Trump gin up his support in terms of the election was rigged and these kinds of things. And we saw that. And even when we talk about the Attorney General, he filed a lawsuit saying that the ballots were not counted correctly. And that's what endeared him to Trump in terms of the support. So certainly I don't think this is good. And again, I think the country should be about yielding, talking about democracy in terms of not preventing people from voting, making it accessible, and let people know they understand that things can be corrected.
Right.
We saw about 30% of the ballots, the mail-in ballots, they didn't have the correct, but there's time to correct that. I think up until March the 7th, you can make those corrections. So we shouldn't be in the business of preventing people from voting. Democracy is about expansion, giving everybody the right to have their voices heard.
Of course, the Republicans will say that, these rules that they've been put into place are made to enhance that, to do just what you're suggesting they do. And that's been what has been talked about throughout the country, although some of the experts who look at the analysis indicate that that might not be the case. You talked about the Attorney General. Let's talk about some of the numbers that we have now. Very early in the Attorney General contest. But Ken Paxton, as we talked about earlier, with 43%, with a very few percentage reporting there. George P. Bush, who has been talking about and been talking as if he was going to be in the runoff. He's been very confident about that and been taking shots at Eva Guzman. On our airways, you can see the battling commercials that have been George P. Bush at Eva Guzman and vice versa, and Ken Paxton seems to be above the fray. What do you think about those early numbers there?
I'm not surprised. There's a battle for second place here. I think the odds are that Ken Paxton may not receive 50% of the vote, and certainly I think the hope for George P. Bush and also Eva Guzman to get that second place finish so they can force him into a runoff. And I think the Bush marquee may be at issue here if we don't see a better showing coming from George P. Bush in this one.
So, Dr. Rottinghouse, that he makes a good point about the Bush marquee. Of course, the Bush electoral process as it is right now is nothing compared to the Bush process of previous years. I mean, the Bush name right now in political life is nothing like George W. or George H.W. And so that's a whole new ballgame, is it not?
It is. The one thing that the Bush name brings is certainly money, and that's something that George P. Bush had a good amount of, and that's in part why he's there pretty close to getting that second place spot. It'll be interesting to watch that as the night unfolds, because that's going to be still, I think, the top story of the cycle. I also think that it's interesting that you've got two prominent Latino Republicans running against each other. That's Guzman and George P. Bush. This is something that the Republican Party's been trying desperately to to court. And the Latino vote is one that does tend to be less political, less ideological. So to some degree, they're up for grabs. But to see the kind of standard bearers of the Latino community in the Republican Party going after each other and then tearing each other down is certainly complicated, and I think can create some bad feelings. So it's not uncommon that primaries make this happen. But I think for Republicans, this is a net negative, because you've got, no matter who wins, a nominee who's bruised. And then even if you're not the nominee, you've still got candidates who are struggling to put together their political career after it. So it's not a great situation for Republicans, no matter what happens.
And we'll talk more about that, because I know down the valley, they've been doing a pretty good job of trying to get a lot more support, Republican support from Hispanics, and so that's a whole new ballgame. Hey, Michael Laparty is our reporter on the scene covering the Attorney General race. Michael, what are you seeing right now? Where are you, and what are you hearing from your location?
Hey, Khambrel, good evening. So right now behind me, this is in Sugar Land. We're at a venue for a watch party that's being hosted by Fort Bend County Judge KP George. But as you mentioned, we've been keeping an eye on the Attorney General race throughout the state for this evening. I've been listening to some of your commentary that you guys have been delivering over the last few minutes or so, in particular about this race. And I did talk with George P. Bush earlier today. And just as you guys had mentioned a short time ago, he told me he believes it is likely that this race is going to head for a runoff, at least on the Republican side. And he also told me that his campaign was also preparing for a campaign for the next few months in the event of a runoff election, which I thought was quite interesting. But at this point, in terms of the numbers, like you had mentioned, Khambrel, just looking at them so far, we've only seen a trickle of numbers in so far, at least at what I'm seeing on the state website. It doesn't look like we have nearly enough to come to any conclusions at this point. It's just too early at this point. On the Democratic side, so we have 5 candidates over there. When I talked with Joe Jaworski a little bit earlier today, he's an attorney, former mayor of Galveston. He was telling me he too believes on the Democratic side there could possibly be a runoff over there. But once again, as we're seeing when it comes to numbers so far at this point in time, just way too early to draw any conclusions just yet. But I think that would be very interesting if we had one on both sides, and I'm talking about a runoff on both sides. But at least so far, there's been a lot of talk of that potential on the Republican side, and you just heard some commentary about it this evening. But as you guys have been saying so far, we are watching those numbers come in and keeping a close eye on that this evening, Khambrel.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. The Democrats, you talked about your conversation with Joe Jaworski. Joe is running against, I think Lee Merritt is the guy who is a civil rights attorney from the Dallas area. And so he's hoping to do well there. But we also have other people in the race that cannot be discounted. And that number is surprising to me. I think if you look at that number there, both Dr. Adams and Dr. Rottinghouse, I would not have expected this number for Rochelle Mercedes Garza in this Texas Attorney General race. What do you make of that?
I would have thought that Joe Jaworski would have run much better, and I know it's early, but that's surprising, to be honest with you.
Dr. Rottinghouse?
Yeah, I'm surprised too. I think in part it's the Latino vote. We've seen this in other elections, even in 2018 when Beto O'Rourke was running. You saw that the Latino candidates with Hispanic surnames do well in places. It's a kind of modifier. Also, the fact that she's a woman is part of it too. We've seen data that suggests that females do better in the Democratic primary. So it's maybe not surprising in that way. But I think, as you're saying, it's surprising because Jaworski's been running for longer than all of them, and he's raised a bunch of money. He's got a bunch of endorsements. So in that sense, it's surprising to see that the kind of elites in the Democratic Party and the funders who mostly put their money into these elections hasn't paid off in the way that was expected.
Yeah. Wow. That's all I can say on that one. That came out of left field as I was preparing for this evening. I must apologize to Ms. Mercedes Garza for not spending a lot more time looking at her. Jared in the control room, we're going to talk about something we may not have a graphic for, but I want to talk about this because Congressman Kevin Brady is retiring. As he announced his retirement. And man, that opened up a real, now I don't want to say cat fight, that may not be the right word, but a real battle for his seat. Dr. Adams, what have you seen in that battle? Because not only does it come down to who can be conservative, but there's a battle among endorsements among the conservatives.
Yeah, it's been really ugly, and I think we've seen Marjorie Taylor Greene come in and weigh in on this side in this particular election. And so I think it speaks about I don't want to say implosion of what's happening within the Republican Party in terms of the debate between what we would consider Lincoln Republicans or part of that, the Lincoln Project. But still, in Texas, I think it has brought out the worst in this particular election.
So, Dr. Ridinghouse, talking in particular about Morgan Luttrell, who has been endorsed by Congressman Crenshaw, both of them, Luttrell and Crenshaw, former Navy SEALs, and they have that bond. But his endorsement, and those of us who are, I'm an independent, people who know me, they know I'm a hardcore independent. Right. So I look at that, and Congressman Crenshaw is to the right of center, clearly. But there are those in the Republican Party who say he is just not far enough right. And the fact that he endorsed Morgan Luttrell, actually, they have used that as a way to say he's not the guy. Right. Dr. Ridinghouse?
Yeah, they put up billboards, saying that, he's a Crenshaw, supporter, and so he's a rhino, a Republican in name only. The drift in terms of ideology for both parties has been astounding. It's been happening for a long time in Texas. What's interesting is that Rick Perry is a big supporter of Marcus Luttrell. He's close with the family, and so that's another endorsee there. Dan Patrick also endorsed Luttrell. So you've had a bit of a proxy war there against Chris Collins, who was a former Cruz staffer and, like Dr. Adams said, had a lot of firepower from the national scene come down. It's interesting to see this race develop as it has. I thought for sure it'd be more of a nail biter. This is a different district than it was. It's very much more in the western part of Harris County. So the district is different in a way that may have lent itself to the kind of politics that Luttrell is able to bring. So I think that if this holds, it'll give us a sense of where the Republican Party is going. How can you be successful in a Republican Party? And we've actually seen examples of this in a special election in Fort Worth in Congressional District 6, where you had a similar kind of dynamic. You had a kind of very conservative element going against more, we'll say moderate element, but certainly mainstream element. And so it's definitely a signal of where the Republican Party is right now and who can be successful going forward.
Well, in 25% of reporting right now, don't you think as well that this kind of reflects kind of the way that Congressman Brady has been? Congressman Brady is conservative. There's no doubt about that. But he is not going to say that the election was stolen. No. He's not going to say that. No. And neither is Dan Crenshaw. And perhaps that's part of the reason why Morgan Luttrell is doing as well as he's doing now, because they represent more of that Brady group as opposed to the group that's going to bring in Marjorie Taylor Greene. That Dan Crenshaw has said that's a sideshow from all the Republicans who claim that the race was stolen, that sort of thing. And so it's interesting to see the infighting that's going on with all of that. So thank you, Jared, for pulling that up. As we say, we roll a little bit with the punches here as we look at these different numbers here. What kind of races, I want to ask each of you tonight, what race in particular are you most interested in seeing and wondering what the outcome is going to be? Dr. Adams, you first.
Congressional District 30, I would like to see how they're faring in terms of the opportunity to replace.
Okay, hold that thought for just a moment. We just got a word that Beto O'Rourke has just walked up to the podium and is ready to speak. Want to go to that live and see what he's saying.
Let me get them knocking on doors and making phone calls and lighting up the phones of our fellow Texans. And I'm going to try, Beto, as best as I can to get to 2 million voters by the end of February, which was yesterday. Well, she told me today we reached 4.5 million voters over the course of February. Un milagro. Absolutely amazing. A miracle. And it's a miracle born of the people of Texas. This campaign is powered by the people of Texas. We will win this race together because of, by, and for the people of Texas. All I need to know from you is, are you ready to sign up and to be part of this campaign? Because if you will do this, I promise you, we will win this. The people of Texas are sick of what we have and they want to change. They cannot believe that the governor of this state will not trust women to make their own decisions for themselves. that he set a $10,000 bounty on the back of anyone who assists any woman in making her own health care decisions. Well, you don't have to be a Democrat to know that that is wrong, but it's going to take all of us working together to elect me so that you have a governor who trusts every woman to make her own decisions about her own body and her own future and her own health care each and every single time. We're going to do this. I really feel this. Sí se puede. And I just want you to think about what you are willing to do right now and how you want to feel on this night, November 8th, 8.5 months from today. Now, I hope, and I'm going to have to check with Amy and the kids, but I hope we're back in Tarrant County on election night. And just like we are going to do tonight, I hope we're drinking beer on that night. And I hope we wake up on the 9th of November with the best hangover we have ever had in our lives, because we've celebrated the best victory we've ever seen in the state of Texas. But think about how you want to feel that night, how you want to look back on this one and say, look, on March 1st of this year, I dedicated myself to my kids, to my family, to my state, to my country, to the generations yet to come. And when all was on the line, and we knew that we had the odds against us, and they were trying to rig the rules of the road while we were actually running this race in the election, I did not allow that to deter me. I did not succumb to the temptation of despair. I got up. I got after it. I knocked on my neighbor's door. I invited them into this democracy, voting in this election, and I made sure that their voice was heard, that their vote counted, that their vision was reflected in the campaign that we ran together. On that night, November 8th of 2022, you want to feel completely exhausted, like you've done everything you could have done within your power to win this race. Nothing but nothing left on the field. That beer is going to taste so much more refreshing. That victory is going to be all the sweeter for it. And we are going to celebrate like Texas has never celebrated before. Are you ready for this? I am ready to do this with you. We are going to get the big things done for Texas again. Fort Worth, thank you for turning out for us tonight. Thank you for signing up. Thank you for being part of this victory. And I look forward to running this with you and winning it for you. We'll see you soon. Adios y nos vemos. Gracias, Fort Worth. Thank you.
Beto O'Rourke, obviously excited and happy. And by the way, we will also, when the governor comes out to speak, we'll do the same thing. We want to give them an opportunity. We've got time. That's what we're doing. That's the purpose of this evening, is to give everybody a shot to be able to say what they have to say. Where we have our reporter station, we want to make sure that they get that opportunity, equal opportunity to say what they need to say moving forward. So good to hear from him. Dr. Ridinghouse, we're just in the process of finding out. The one you're looking for is that race in for
Dallas.
U.S. For 30,
yes,
which is where
Eddie Bernice Johnson, she's retiring, and so that's an open seat.
Right.
And she endorsed Jasmine Crockett, and Jasmine was a member of the State House of Representatives. She is, and she was part of the group, and she was very vocal when they broke quorum.
Right.
And she has been somewhat of a progressive, but I think she moderated her tone during this campaign. And the only, I guess, left-leaning, I think Elizabeth Warren endorsed her recently. However, she has sort of like eschewed some of the AOC and some of the other kind of endorsement. So I would like to see that, and that's going to be probably head to a runoff as well.
Okay. Dr. Ridinghouse, your vote, your race that you are most interested and intrigued by tonight?
I think there are a lot. So thanks for the question. I think the one I'm watching of those we haven't talked about yet is the Democratic race for lieutenant governor. This has been a race that's been forming for a better part of a year. Mike Collier, who's run for lieutenant governor before and has run for controller before, is a kind of moderate Democrat, and he's got some competition from Carlin Braley, who is a former Democratic Party official from Dallas, and from Representative Beckley from North Texas there, who's probably the most liberal member of the legislature on the Democratic side. It should be a pretty interesting race because the Democrats have got a bit of an identity crisis. They're trying to figure out what the best course of action is to run against Dan Patrick. Do you choose somebody who's in the middle, who's a moderate, who can appeal to potentially crossover voters or independent voters who typically vote for the conservative ticket? Or do you nominate somebody who's more to the left, who can rally Democrats in a new Democratic coalition that includes younger people, ethnic and racial minorities, people in big cities? So that's really the kind of sort of question the Democrats have to answer. And I think that race will help them answer it.
That is going to be, we're still waiting for numbers for that, by the way. It's interesting, though, you can see information on the bottom of the screen. We have that scrolling. So if you're interested in other races, while we're not talking about them, I've been able to see some as well. Some, for example, Commissioner of Harris County, and some of those places as well. So we'll continue to have those scrolling on the bottom of the screen throughout this evening. So as they come in, you can see those updated in front of you as well. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes, and hope you'll stay with us. We'll talk more about the races here locally and what we can expect from the State of the Union coming up as well. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of election 2022. A lot to talk about. We've been looking at the returns coming in. On the bottom of your screen, you can see those as well. They'll be coming in as they are updated on a computer. They go right on the bottom, so you can see those even if we're not talking about them. I will tell you, Associated Press has just declared that Beto O'Rourke has won his primary race. Not the shock at all that anyone was thinking was going to happen. So it's going true to form. And he obviously had that sense as well, because you just heard him speak. Now he's getting ready to take on the rest of the state and touch hands with a lot of people throughout. So Beto O'Rourke now knows that he is now declared the winner of the primary, will represent the Democratic Party in the race for governor. We're going to talk about a lot of different things here, but locally there's a couple of things that are going on. District 38 was one that was created. You probably heard about all the information about the redistricting that was going on and how they were changing things around. Well, this is District 38, and there's a number of other people. There are more people running than what you see there. No votes have come in for some reason. The early voting numbers have not come in there. There's any number of reasons why that may be the case. But in that race, with so many people, it's interesting to note that that district, I'm told, was actually created with Wesley Hunt in mind. Dr. Rottinghouse, have you heard the same thing?
Yeah, that's been the rumor, and certainly it's the case that he presented a good candidate for the Republicans. It's an interesting reshaping of Harris County so that is the kind of, fillet of conservative Republicans in the city. And so it's definitely going to be a Republican district. Whichever Republican wins this is going to be in Congress. So we'll see. The likelihood is it is Wesley Hunt. He's raised a lot of money. His profile was really good. So I think we're likely to see that happen. But of course, time will tell.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just got word that the AP has also declared Governor Abbott the winner in his race, which is not a surprise at all. And so he should be coming out and speaking just a little bit. But in the meantime, let's go to Roseanne Aragon. She's in Corpus Christi, where they are now waiting for Governor Abbott to come out and speak. Roseanne, are they getting the same sense of winning spirit that we're hearing now that the AP has declared him the winner of that race?
Well, I can tell you the energy is definitely good here as things start to pick up. We know we're expected to hear from him. That news just came to us, and we'll be looking to see if we have any officials here who would like to say anything about it. Meanwhile, this is the stage here. You see the USS Lexington, that big Texas flag. This is where the governor has decided to have his celebration, his campaign now celebration party. We know the AP has just called it for Governor Greg Abbott. The primary elections were looking good. It was as expected. Governor Abbott's initiatives as governor is stated to build a healthier, safer, freer, and more prosperous future for all Texans. According to the state's website, his campaign slogan today, securing the future of Texas. Ultimately, the counting continues, but the AP has called it for the governor. The governor is expected to address his supporters any minute now. Doors opened not too long ago. And following the initial results and now the results of the Texas GOP primary, which showed Greg Abbott in first place, former state senator Don Huffines' campaign announced he would not contest the election results and instead declared victory on forcing the incumbent governor to the right, stating, Texas Republicans voted overwhelmingly for conservative reforms via the ballot referenda. I pray Greg Abbott listens to our voters and moves to deliver on these initiatives. Ultimately, back here, we are expecting Governor Abbott to address supporters today. I can only imagine their campaign here is happy. They got what they were expecting. I don't see this being any surprise, but we will make sure to bring the latest from Governor Abbott's campaign from here in Corpus Christi. For now, reporting live, Roseanne Aragon, KPRC 2 News.
You, Roseanne. And as we continue, we'll watch what's going on there in Corpus Christi. If the governor gets ready to come out and speak, of course, we'll go right back to you live and hear his comments. No surprise from either of you, I'm sure, on what we're expecting here now going forward. What kind of general election campaign do you think there will be? I mean, because now we know that typically in the primaries, people run to the right of their party, at least right in Republican circles, to the left maybe in Democrat. But now it's time to go to a general election. How do you think that will change his tenor?
Certainly, I think the governor will continue the conservative road, and certainly casting O'Rourke in liberal cloth or clothing, for example. We'll see a lot of that. But this will be an interesting race. You hadn't seen the kind of dynamism that O'Rourke generated in 2018 when he was running against Cruz, in particular ginning up young voters. And I think it would be very important to see how he speaks on those issues. And I think the economy is something that he needs to touch and hark on that. But on the Republican side, I think we'll see a lot of these woke messages and these kinds of things. Right?
Yeah, that seems to be the terminology. I noticed I started writing down, woke and CRT and those kind of things in the campaign kind of messages. They know that that's kind of what proves their point, so to speak. Right. Dr. Whitinghouse, what kind of campaign do you think we'll see the governor put together, and actually for both of them, for governor and for Beto O'Rourke in the general? What kind of campaign do you think we'll see?
I think it's going to be nasty and expensive. Two things we're frankly used to in modern Texas politics. Both sides have obviously got key issues they hope to run on and win on. But I think a lot of this is going to come down to how the Texans feel ideologically. And there's a case to be made that the Republicans have moved too far to the right. There's also a case to be made that Beto O'Rourke has moved too far to the left. So I think this is really going to be a fight for the middle. And so that's going to be one of the most prominent factors here. I think the best strategy for O'Rourke is to nationalize this race, to make Greg Abbott a national Republican villain. That's what he did for Ted Cruz. To some degree, Ted Cruz did it to himself, but he certainly made Ted Cruz that national villain. That poured in money from all over the country, which O'Rourke is going to need if he's going to beat Greg Abbott, who's already got a $60+ million war chest.
Well, now at the same token, doesn't that work against him? When Republicans will use that against those, carpetbaggers coming into this state and use that against him in a general election?
I think that they will. There's no question that they're going to throw a lot of that at him. Whether it'll work or not, we'll have to wait and see. But it's going to have to be a race that's well funded, because if it's not, then O'Rourke simply doesn't have the ability to be able to move and to convince people that he's the kind of moderate choice. As it is now, people don't see that that's true. I think for Abbott, the same kind of holds. He's got to be able to, like Dr. Adams says, paint O'Rourke as kind of liberal, out of touch, and somebody who's going to move the state in the wrong direction. Abbott will also run on his record, which to some degree, at least for many economically, has been pretty good. So there's definitely going to be several points of contention, but the big picture here is sort of where the middle goes. And if it's the case that, like we saw in Virginia and like we saw in New Jersey in the 2021 special elections, then there's going to be a kind of big fight in the suburbs. And whoever's winning this sort of meaty middle of voters is going to do, I think, better.
Yeah.
So I have you're going to say?
No, I was going to go back to the presidential race, and I'm sure you remember, I think, O'Rourke was done in when he said that he was going to take the assault rifles, right? So that's going to come back. I'm sure that's going to be out there as well.
That whole process. And also, I noticed that in the early voting, the numbers were down this time around. Now, typically they're low anyway, but they were lower than they were the last cycle. And in this race, the number of Republicans were higher than Democrats. So Republicans are much more energized right now. And so that would tend to mean to me that makes Beto O'Rourke's climb even that much more challenging, because Republicans are much more energized right now. Now we're still, some time away from 2022 from the November, and even farther away from the next presidential election. But clearly, that seems to be that energy that's in place right now.
Yeah, and I think Brandon is correct in terms of nationalizing the race. It all depends on Biden as well in terms of how he performs and whether or not Beto will be tied to his coattails, for example, in terms of whether they rise or sink. And so that's going to be important. And I'm hoping tonight that Biden will give us somewhat of a reset in terms of what he wants to do.
How important is it, Dr. Whitinghouse, for the current president, to paint a picture that's going to be enough to get the base out that he wants to get out in order for him to have any kind of chance. Because as you know, and you both know, that in that off-year election, the year after that president, typically the other party gains seats. And the way things have been going now, there's nothing that indicates much in the way of positivity that the Democrats can be happy about.
Yeah, the generic ballot has got the Republicans winning by +7, so that translates to like about a 30-seat to 35-seat loss for Democrats down ballot.
Wow.
So that's certainly enough to flip the House and definitely puts Joe Biden in a bind in the next Congress, because he's going to have to deal with divided government one way or the other. So that's definitely the case. I think also, too, politically, we can watch to see whether or not Democrats are talking about Joe Biden. What's been funny to this cycle is that you haven't seen a lot of discussion about Joe Biden. You've seen Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you've seen Elizabeth Warren, like we've been talking about, but you haven't seen a lot of Joe Biden. So I think that, like we saw with the midterm that Barack Obama went through, you're going to see candidates not talking much about it because either the president is not popular or it's simply the case that it's misleading to talk about the president in that race. So I think that's going to be something that we'll have to watch going forward through November.
We're going to continue to have these conversations. I want to talk more about our local races here now as well. In the District 34 in the House, that is not expected to be a hotly contested race where Randy Weber is running for a re-election in that race. I wouldn't expect to see anything different there. That district is solidly Republican as well throughout the area, and that is the case here now. Randy Weber with that, he can go to bed really early if you see a 90% rate of return so far, with 23% of the votes counted so far. So in that District 14 race, that is the case. So Jared, in the control room, as you see numbers, any numbers you want to pull up, you can do that. We'll look at them and we'll talk about them. But in the meantime, here's the rest of those numbers on the Democratic side. And as I said, Michael Williams is still only two people. Eugene Howard has run before. Michael Williams running as well. This is very few numbers in. This is talking about 1%. So it's really early there. As I said, in District 14, that is really a district that the State House, they drew it to be a Republican district, and there's nothing to indicate that that's going to change this time around as well. So as we continue to look at those, it was very interesting to me that Troy Nehls in District 22, that when they redrew that district, they took out big chunks of what would have been city people, and they gave that to Lizzie Fletcher. Right. Lizzie Fletcher in 7, which was Culberson, which was George H.W. Bush at some point in time, a long time ago, and it was flipped by Lizzie. And now that Congresswoman Fletcher, we get to know them on a first name basis. They want us to know. They want us to know them on a first name basis. But that whole process has changed. Doesn't that not make? They did a really good job, did they not, in redrawing these districts to make these districts more red?
Right. They did it. But if you look at what they did for District 7, they took the most conservative part of that and put it in 38. In order to shore up and make sure that it would become a Republican opportunity district. And they ran Lizzie down towards the international district into Fort Bend County. Right. And so I think that was the trade-off, all right there. And my thing is, there's something called the whole county rule that they use in the state legislature. They put the House district in Harris County. If you look at the numbers, I say each member represent about 700,000 or more. We could have had districts wholly in Harris County, and they would have been fair maps and much better. But again, they broke it up, they cracked it, and again, to make them red. I agree with you. And 38 is ruby red.
So, Dr. Ridinghouse, your thoughts about that? I mean, they did a really good job. I mean, and now some have said that they have done an illegal job. I mean, I know that that's some of the accusations, but everybody does it. I shouldn't say everybody, but each party does it. In New York, you see that happening all the time. In Harris County, the commissioners, they made some changes in some of the maps so that Adrian Garcia's district precinct, for example, would be more amenable to him. In Fort Bend County, the commissioners did the same thing. They redrew it to make it so it's not something that doesn't go on. But in this case, They really did a good job. But thinking about Troy Nehls, now a lot of his districts out in the, and he really did not win by as much as they probably thought he could have won the last time around. But that shouldn't be the case this time around in the general election. You think?
Yeah, it's unlikely. I know Dr. Adams knows this phrase because I'm sure he teaches it like I do. But effectively, you've got politicians picking voters instead of voters picking politicians. So seeing these districts carved up in this way is just par for the course. Everybody does it to maximize their partisan advantage. In fact, it was funny that the Texas Democrats staged a walkout out of protest that there wasn't enough input from the Democrats to draw the lines. But the same thing happened in Oregon, except it was that the Republicans had walked out. So everybody's doing it. It's a political chore that's as old as raising money. And so it's unlikely to see that change much, although we are seeing some states go to either a bipartisan or a nonpartisan redistricting committee. And that does have results, in fact, of reducing partisan tension. But for sure, it's the case that you're going to see a lot of the inter-party challenges be the key here. So on the Leslie Fletcher question, I think that's really interesting. And that is that likely down the road, she's going to face a Democrat. So Henry Cuellar in Congressional District 28 that runs from San Antonio all the way down to the border is facing a spirited challenger from Jessica Cisneros, who is running a very progressive campaign. So you're definitely seeing these opportunities for inter-party battles because of these lines drawn.
And we can go back to Fort Bend. You can make the argument that Fort Bend County could have its own congressional district inside of Fort Bend proper, and certainly it would be a Democrat elected, given the population growth and the diversity there. Right?
But they
cracked it.
They cracked it and made sure that was not the case and moved it out. And Troy Nehls has been invited to come on this program a number of times. And for some reason, and I say this program, the Houston Newsmakers program, which you both have been a part of. And, it's a welcoming program. You feel welcome when you come on that program, don't you?
Always.
Never threatened.
And most of the politicians who come on, they feel the same way. Congressman Nehls has not been able to feel the need to come. And I respect that. And I'll continue to invite you, my congressman, and hope that you'll come on the program at some time and we can talk about that. Let's continue to look at some of the local numbers that we have that are coming in, any kind of numbers that we have that are making their way. Dan Crenshaw, no shock at all. There were those who obviously were trying to say that he was not far enough to the right and he was not going to be the guy, but he seemed to be doing just fine. And he seemed to get a lot more attention for the middle, in terms of political middle, when he made his comments during the Republican convention, when he would not mention the name of the then President Trump, and has made it clear that when he speaks to people that he says that there was no stolen election, which is what some of the far right in the party indicate that that's a problem. So I would say that when we're seeing this, there's no real surprise at all there. And in the general election, on the Democratic side, of course, this is the 7th. We looked at that. We talked about that a little bit. The 7th, the numbers there indicate that this is the Republican primary, those who would want to run against Lizzie Fletcher. And so Johnny Teague he's run before, and he very possibly could get to that 50% vote margin to be able to run against Lizzie Fletcher, the incumbent there, who really has been pretty aggressive in terms of, because she's in the energy corridor, she's been fighting a lot for oil and for the oil industry quite a bit. And she has to, because that is former Culberson territory, which that's so she's been able to do that. At any rate, Johnny Teague hopes to be able to have that opportunity to run against her. Do you sense that there's any chance that that she's going to be challenged at all in her run?
I don't think so. I think the district, with the numbers, with the redistricting, my position was that it was shored up as a solid Democratic district. Right. So I think she'll be reelected.
So that whole, by the way, I did want to say that we also, we said this earlier, that Judge Emmett, Ed Emmett, is going to be a part of this conversation, and we're going to bring him in a little bit because he has his finger on the pulse of a lot that goes on within Harris County still. Even though he has not in political office, don't be persuaded to think that he doesn't know what's going on. He has a finger on the pulse of what's going on. There's Ed Emmett right there.
Welcome, Judge.
Judge Emmett, how are you?
Talking about me again, are you?
I was. It was all good stuff, though. It was all good stuff. We'll play it back for you so you can know how effusive in praise I was about you. How are you, Judge? Good to see you, sir.
I'm good.
You've been looking at some of the returns tonight. Anything surprising you at all?
Well, yeah. Of course, all we have are the early returns for Harris County.
Yeah.
But in what I think is, for most people, an obscure race, if you look at the Republican primary for county treasurer, Kyle Scott is beating Eric Dick handily. And, most people thought just the name ID with Eric Dick would, sort of pull him through that race. But no, Kyle Scott was winning handily. The other thing that's kind of interesting on the Democrat side, I don't think it's, you want me to talk about county judge, so I got to do that. But, I don't think Judge Hidalgo's win by the margin is anything particularly surprising. She's very high profile. The Republican race is still going to be a runoff with the two names to be decided. But also on the Democrat side, looking ahead a little bit for Senator John Whitmire to be getting 62% against a new challenger named Molly Cook, and she's getting 38% against a sitting incumbent senator. I think that probably is going to get some people's attention. But other than that, I guess the other takeaway I have is Commissioner Adrian Garcia is winning by a larger margin than what I think some people thought he might. But we'll wait and see how the results come rolling in later on.
On 4 on Kegel.
Trying to think if there's anything else.
I don't know. On which one you're talking about, Doc?
Kegel 4.
Oh, I haven't seen anything on Precinct 4. If you get that, Jared, in there, pull that up for us as well. So you're right. Eric Dick has been a lot of commercials, but his commercials have been for his business. As opposed to, running. I mean, his commercials have been about his insurance or something, right? I mean, that's what we get with his Rice hat, and he doesn't go to Rice. I mean, but that's another whole story. But he hasn't been out there, and I think maybe is that part of the reason? Is that race not considered one that's really high profile, and you figure that you can get in, and if you spend money just the right way, you can be able to win it without necessarily running a lot of ads?
That definitely is a very low profile race, but Eric Dick has been on the Harris County Department of Education, so he's been on the ballot and he's been elected countywide to some things. But so Kyle Scott's a newcomer, and if the early votes turn out to hold, then I think that'll be really quite an upset.
Is it a foregone conclusion that whoever wins? What is the challenge in that race? Let's say Kyle Scott would win. Is a Democrat between Dylan Osborne, Carla White? Who do you think would be somebody you have to look at there?
This is one of those races that just goes with whatever the partisan vote is. I think the other two will agree with me on that. This isn't a race that runs on its own merits necessarily.
So turnout has always been an issue, and whether this time around, and we were talking about this earlier, Judge, that Republicans are much more excited about going to the polls now, it seems, than Democrats. The early vote numbers seem to indicate that. What does that foretell as it relates to the general when it comes up in November, or is it just too early to tell?
Well, I think if the November election were held today, the Republicans would be much more energized than the Democrats. But it's a long way between March the 1st and the November election, and particularly with world events that are going on. I mean, I wouldn't read a whole lot into it, but I do think Republicans are feeling better about themselves, not only in Harris County, but statewide. I'm talking to you from Laredo right now, and the Valley, there are some counties down here that have never basically had any Republican primary votes, and they've gone up 6,000%. And so the Valley is beginning to I won't say it's Republican yet, but it's certainly trending that way. So there is this enthusiasm in certain pockets of the state that we'll see how it all turns out between now and November.
And Dr. Ridinghouse, what do you make out the reason for that? Because some have said that the Democrats really blew it over the last election cycle by not paying attention to the right places when they should have. And that's why you saw the trend where former President Trump was able to get more votes there than anyone ever would have expected.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the reason is investment. The Republicans have done a great job at making sure they're courting voters in those areas. We've done a bunch of polling through the Center for Mexican American Studies here at UH and independent of that, where we've asked people about whether or not they're being contacted by various parties, and the numbers we get are outstanding because people are saying primarily that they're not being contacted. And so the Republicans, who have gotten traditionally 35 to 40% of the Latino vote, were able to see that, capitalize on it, and talk to these voters who wanted to see some change. In addition, they were able to run a narrative that said that the economy was really important, that they were concerned about healthcare issues, and the pandemic was something that unseated a lot of support for Democrats. So the Republicans, I think, get credit. I mean, partly it's because Democrats had not done as good a job at keeping that vote, but you can't deny the fact that Republicans did as much on the other side to court it.
Dr. Adams, you said earlier you were interested in the John Whitmire race. Yes. And when the judge talked about that number, that is exactly why you were interested in seeing that race.
That's right, because he has been accused of running for 2 offices, all right? He's already announced that he would like to be the next mayor of Houston.
You think that was a mistake for him to do that when he did?
It may have been, because right now it looks like his popularity may not be that in terms of his consideration of the mayoral race.
But there's a lot to be said about how quickly you jump into the mayor's race, because there's an expectation that it's going to be quite crowded when Mayor Turner is not going to be back, obviously. Right. So the big crowd that's going to be rushing, and we see names being offered. So maybe that's why Senator Whitmire said, I got to do this now.
I agree. And also for his opponent, it bodes well. If he seeks the mayor's office, then she's in a good position to win that Senate seat in the next round. Yeah.
I want to remind everybody, the ticker at the bottom of the screen is updating information as we speak, real time. As the computer gets it, it brings it in. Some of the numbers are coming in, some of them aren't. A lot of these numbers are reflective of early voting numbers, plus some of the early voting numbers. Remember, early on, I talked to you about the fact that the Secretary of State has said, and I'm going to remind everybody again, that the Harris County vote, and Judge, I don't know if you heard that earlier, that the voting, there's a delay in Harris County in the vote counting, and that the Secretary of State says that it's ballot tabulation in Harris County is the problem, and they say that it's not a result of anything other than that it is because it's due to damaged ballot sheets that must be duplicated before they can be scanned by ballot tabulators at the central count location. But the point is that they will not have the results in by tomorrow at 7 p.m. So that's something new, and the Secretary of State is saying that, okay, we're ready to help Harris County any way we can. That's got to make you cringe a little bit, because I know that was something that you were really proud about and trying to make sure that the electoral process would run as smoothly as it could.
Well, absolutely. And okay, I'm going to be blunt here. Ever since we've had an election administrator running Harris County votes, it's been a disaster. Every election has been a disaster, and they're not doing anything about it. And I'm not here to endorse anybody for the office or any of that, but when I was in office, if the county clerk had been this negligent in being able to count votes, we would have seen screaming all over the streets. And this has just got to stop. I mean, every election since they put in an election administrator, we've had some excuse, and there should be no excuse. And so anyway, the other thing I will point out, I looked at the Secretary of State's website, just looking at some of the races, and they've got some errors in theirs. For example, in Senate District 11, they show Bianca Gracia well ahead of Mays Middleton and everybody else in that race. I don't think that's a correct number.
Yeah,
I mean,
Our ticker here had it just the opposite. Our ticker here had a different number. It had Mays Middleton with a good lead. So I don't know where the numbers
But
were
your
coming
ticker's just Harris County, though.
Yeah, it would be.
And that's a multi-county race, and so
Okay.
it's a Secretary of State.
Right.
But clearly something was not right on that, because I'm sure she would have looked at that and thought, my goodness, look, I'm winning.
Yeah. Well, let's not pop the champagne just yet. So we're continuing to look at the numbers as they come in. As I said, we have the numbers on the bottom of your screen as well. And we have reporters in various places throughout the region and the state waiting. We're still waiting for Governor Abbott. AP has declared that he is the winner of the primary. No surprise there at all. And as soon as he comes out and starts to speak, we will take that live. In the meantime, as we have numbers, that you have numbers, if you have numbers, Jared, put numbers up, and we'll talk about the races that we have. Any numbers coming in other than the early vote numbers that were coming in. As we took at the bottom of the screen there as well, we see the different numbers coming in along the way. Let's talk a little bit about the continuing impact that we think that a former president will have on the electoral process, not only in this state, but in the country. We continue to see what I call Trumpublicans that are really emerging, and they're a really big part of the party. Your sense of what you see in that influence, not only in state, but national politics?
I think what we've seen tonight in terms of the number of candidates that were endorsed by Donald Trump, and I think that will transcend to nationally in terms of sort of like embellishing his power to get involved in these congressional elections. Right.
Judge Emmett, I need to ask you this because the Republican Party that you have been a part of for quite some time does not seem to resemble that anymore. Is there any consternation about that, or is that healthy in terms of what the party is going through in terms of its, changing on the fly, so to speak?
Well, since I got involved in politics in the 1970s, I can say the Republican Party doesn't look anything like the party that I was part of, nor does the Democratic Party look anything like the Democratic Party that was around. They're constantly shifting. I mentioned that I'm in Laredo. AOC has been down campaigning for a congressional candidate here on the Democrat side, and the Democrats are frankly wringing their hands going, oh my gosh, if she gets the nomination, then the Republicans might win that seat. So I think we're seeing it in both parties, but I do think recent days may start changing that a little bit, unless the message gets clearer on where former President Trump stands with regard to Putin and Russia and Ukraine, and because you're beginning to see Republicans scramble to figure out where they need to be on that. So I think it's still a moving target for both parties, but clearly Donald Trump, before he was president, while he was president, and now after he was president, has totally changed the nature of both parties. I mean, it's like he drives both of them to some kind of a fringe. So it'll be interesting to see how it turns out. But clearly in this Republican primary, being endorsed by former President Trump was a good thing for the Republicans that got that endorsement. Now, the one race that we're all watching, of course, the Attorney General race, to see if Attorney General Paxton, who he gets in a runoff with, it's becoming clear that he's not going to win without a runoff. That's still up in the air, and the delayed vote in Harris County is going to make it more difficult because Eva Guzman was ahead of George P. Bush in Harris County by a significant margin. So that would allow her to gain votes in the statewide race. But now we won't know what those are if we don't get the results.
That's a very good point. I didn't think about that, but you're right. The Harris County vote, which could sway a very tight statewide race one way or the other based upon whatever that final number comes in. The latest that we have now with 23% is pretty much the same as it has been the last time we looked at it. This is the overall number with 42% for Paxton, 21% for Guzman, and George P. Bush as well. Louis Gohmert at 16%. So You're right. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the electoral process and how this whole thing gets sorted out, if you will. What kind of fallout would you expect to see, Judge Emmett, about what's happened here with the voting issues once again in Harris County? Is there any recourse when you have an administrator as opposed to an elected official?
Well, yeah, there's a recourse. I mean, Harris County Commissioners Court and the two party chairs should be moving heaven and earth to either find a new election administrator or find out why something goes wrong every time there's an election in Harris County. I'm not particularly opposed to having an election administrator. In fact, most of the counties in the state do, I believe. That's not the problem. The problem is this particular election administrator and that office. I don't know if it's her personally, but that office has not functioned ever since she's been there.
Well, we'll continue to follow this story. I mean, the Secretary of State has indicated that we know now that there's going to be a delay in Harris County voting. And now that may potentially change some of the outcomes as it relates to some of the statewide elections, especially those that are tight. Obviously, the ones that aren't tight, it won't have an issue at all. But those that are tight, there's going to be a problem going forward. Dr. Rottinghouse, I want to get back to you again. We were talking about, you didn't get a chance to weigh in on the John Whitmire number and how the number that he has seems to be a lot less than what it should be, considering his tenure as the dean of the Senate against somebody who's a first-time candidate.
Yeah, it's a little surprising, although I think that, Molly Cook certainly represents a very progressive version of the party, and she's been very active on some of the local transportation issues. So I guess it's not that surprising that she'd do well, but the fact that the money is all in favor of Whitmire, the name ID is all in favor of Whitmire, the turnout machine is all in favor of Whitmire, is definitely something that he's probably going to, look twice at. I don't think he's going to lose sleep over it, considering where things are. And if anything, he's a political survivor. So that's certainly an indication that he's going to survive this and advance to the next, which it looks like is going to be the mayoral race. So we'll see how that shakes out. I also want to comment on the Trump question. Here's a great way to think about how Donald Trump's influence has made both the Republican and Democratic parties unique. And that is in particular that in House District 31, Ryan Guillen, who was a Democrat, switched parties about 6 months ago. Immediately upon switching parties, he got the endorsement of Donald Trump. And so as a new Republican, effectively just like every other old Republican. So that's really a good signal that the state politics is now national politics. Guillen, at least according to some indications here, is almost at 50%, not quite at 50%, in a Republican primary, having been a Republican for only 6 months. So that's an interesting dynamic to the Trump phenomenon that I don't think we're going to see it go away anytime soon.
So I'm going to talk to all of you about this thing. So with that in mind, as we continue to see the January 6th Commission come out with more and more things that under normal circumstances would be quite damaging to any past president, but this is baked in the cake, it seems, with the former President Trump. People knew from the time he came down the escalator and then started talking about Mexicans and they're sending their worst, that there was a part of that product that it didn't really matter. And now it seems that continues to be the case. Why do you think that is? Have you done any studies, either of you political scientists, about why the needle doesn't move one way or the other, even when there's more information that this former president may have had a hand in trying to change the constitutional process of electing a president? Dr. Rottinghouse?
Yeah, I'm working on a book that I'm tentatively calling The Death of Political Scandal, where it seems clear that scandals don't hit like they used to. You've got now a polarized world where people are committed to their own teams. This affective polarization just makes you dislike the other side, regardless of who they are. You've got a world where we live in our own media ecosystems. We don't have a situation where we're looking at what everyone's looking at. We only look at kind of our little narrow partisan slice. That and the fact that media trust is pretty low is contributing to the idea that people just don't believe when their preferred candidates are caught up in scandal, that these things are that bad. So scandals are definitely not as strong as they were as an accountability mechanism to remove people from office. And so Donald Trump is a great example of that, but there are a bunch more. Ken Paxton, who we've been talking about, you've got Matt Gaetz, to some degree you had Chris Cuomo in New York. So there are a lot of politicians who are surviving for longer than they used to because scandals don't have that rejection mechanism the way they used to.
So, Dr. Adams, your thoughts on that?
No, I was about to say, I think Trump has the advantage of actually getting people aroused and ginned up to buy into it, and I think he's targeting a particular base, and he can get that base out there. And unfortunately, in American politics, if you look at the electorate, they will be against some of the things that will benefit them. And I'm harking back to Obama in terms of national health care, for example. There were people out there who were opposed to it because it was framed and the messaging was Obamacare. And these were the same people in West Virginia and other people in other places in the United States that actually had signed up for Obamacare and they really needed. And so I think that's the tragedy that we have in American politics. And I know Judge is there, no pun intended, but I think the Republicans have been better at the messaging than the Democrats. And like Build Back Better now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the prescriptions will be lower? And I think Biden, he would do the Democrats well if they just said what was in it, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's been kind of a known thing.
Yes.
I've talked to some Democrats over the last week, and they said, you know what, Republicans really stay on message. They do a good job of staying on message, yes. And that really helps them. And they come up with a specific message, they stay on message, and it's pumped in. Right. And they have, Fox and some of the other media that helps bake that thing going. So, hey, I'm told by Jared in the control room that we have numbers that are updated. So, Jared, as soon as you have those numbers ready, you just put them up there, buddy, and we'll go ahead and talk about those numbers that are there. Judge Emmett, this is what you were talking about earlier. This is District 11, Mays Middleton with 64%. And one can only assume that, I don't know, you're thinking that this was only Harris County, perhaps. But 25,000 votes, 25% of the vote in, maybe, but that number was pretty substantial for him. This is what we're talking about with Molly Cook and John Whitmire with that 62%, only 1%. So we're still, that's just at the very early voting number, really, more than anything else. So the numbers are really slow coming in, as we normally expect. 17 here, Titus Benton. That was one of the races that we looked at some point. Joan Huffman is the incumbent there. And, of course, Joan Huffman's entrenched. She's been there. That's a red state district. And so Titus Benton, and this is still really early, too, so there's no real indication whether or not that's going to hold up the way it is. But here's a guy who has come out of nowhere and now is hoping to be the giant killer of Joan Huffman, and not likely, according to what it normally is in place. This is in the Republican primary in District 3. Cecil Bell Jr., 69%. Kelly McDonald, 31%. Now there's a big gap there. As we said, though, only 1% voting. So we still run into this. And Judge Emmett, we've done this a lot, haven't we, where we see these numbers take forever to come in. That tends to be the case. And it's the case now with the District 12. Cal coming in. They're not only locally, but wouldn't you think that there'd be a better way to get this whole process? I mean, we've done so much in the world with electronics. Wouldn't you think there'd be a better way to get numbers in a little bit more efficiently than what we're able to in this state? In any state, really.
Like real time?
I know. Go ahead, Judge.
You would think so, but the rest of the state does seem to be able to get their votes in. It's just been Harris County. The District 11 Senate race, for example, a lot of those are Galveston County votes. Chambers County is a small part of it. But yeah, Harris County I don't know, they just can't seem to get it right.
Well, yeah, we'll keep, I'm an eternal optimist, so I'm hoping that will change at some point. District 15, looking at District 15, where Steve Toth, 69% of the vote there in 15. Maris Blair with 31%, very early with only 1% voting. Let us know, Jared, if you got Fort Bend, any Fort Bend numbers coming in. We'll be able to look at some of those as well. District 18, 18th Congressional District. Now, this is what you call just kind of
Exercising futility.
Exercising futility. That's the right word. Thank you. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee is in place in that one. And
No.
I'm sorry.
This is State Rep 18.
Sorry. State Rep
right.
18. Sorry about that. You're right. Thank you, Judge. Appreciate that. State Rep 18 is a whole different ball game there. And so Ernest Bales, 58%. Sorry, I thought that 18. I said, okay, wow, that's not going to work.
Well, Khambrel, I have a bit of an interest in this because this is where our cabin is up in Liberty County. So I follow Ernest a fair amount, and I know there was some concern about this race because Ernest Bales is at least a two-term incumbent, and the fact that he had three people running against him got his attention. He campaigned hard,
right?
So he's back,
right. I saw that area on a map. I was looking at that area earlier today on a map, and in fact, I was looking at it. It's really, boy, they really kind of changed that thing around a little bit. Yeah, it may include your cabinet, but it includes your friends here in Harris County that are really close in as well. Looking at the map, the way it was changed around there, Judge.
Well, I don't think so. I'm not sure what map you're looking at. None of that's in Harris County. That's it's all a lot of East Texas counties. Liberty and San Jacinto.
All right, yeah.
This
is a congressional map I'm looking at now. So, yeah, you're right. Once again, Judge, thank you so much. Hey, so this whole process, as we continue to look at this, Fort Bend County Judge, and this is something that is going to be interesting at some point when we get to the general. Trevor Nels, who's the twin brother of Troy Nels, the current congressman in that area, is now running for Fort Bend County Judge. Bob Hebert. Judge Hebert was a long-time judge there, and as part of that the 2018 Democratic wave, if you will, they got caught up in all of that, and that's what helped. And not saying that was the only reason, but that's what helped KP George win the county judge seat there in Fort Bend County. And this time around, Trevor Nels is hoping to be able to go ahead and reclaim that position for the Republicans. And it clearly looks like the race is going to be between those two. What do you see as going forward? Because this is the county thing. This has nothing to do with the configured changes in the configuration of the map like it did in the congressional map. What have you seen, Dr. Rottinghouse, any changes in what's going on in Fort Bend County that would make this look like it's going to be a really close race in November?
I think it'll be close. Obviously, Fort Bend County's been trending blue, and you've got a booming Asian American population. Those changes lend itself to Democrats winning, but it's an off year for Democrats. And like we said before, you've got a kind of unpopular president at the top of the ticket. You've got a sour economy for a lot of people, and just enthusiasm's low. So that's the opportunity for Republicans to strike in places where they haven't been running as strong. So I still feel like Fort Bend, although it's trending blue, is still pretty soft ground for Democrats. So there's an opportunity there for Republicans. And honestly, Nels is a pretty good candidate for that. I mean, he's well known as county sheriff, and his, brother is in Congress and has been, making that a kind of staple there in Fort Bend. So it could be a competitive race in the right circumstances.
And isn't that interesting, Judge Emmett? I'm looking at that in Fort Bend County. There's 95% reporting. How about that? That's a lot. That's an interesting number. At least that's what that says anyway. As opposed to the numbers that we've been seeing in other places there in Harris County. I'm suspect about that, by the way.
Yeah, I am too. I'd defer to the two professionals here, but I don't. If that's 95% of the vote in Fort Bend County, that was a really awful turnout in Fort Bend County. I don't think that number's right.
I'm glad that you agree that we're all suspect of that number. I looked at that at the top of 95%. I was like, okay, well, no, that's. I don't think that's going to work. So it's interesting how all of this ties into how the national lay of the land is in place. how well President Biden does plays a big role in how well the Democratic Party in local elections is going to be able to do. We know he's giving the State of the Union tonight. We know that he's responding to Ukraine. His numbers are lower than he and anyone expected they would be. What do you think he needs to do going forward in order to improve his numbers across the board?
First of all, I think he needs to talk about Ukraine, but frame it in the sense of pulling the country together in terms of the parties. And I think Judge Emmett talked about in terms of Donald Trump, whether he's with Putin or whatever, get Americans to understand that rally around the flag, for example, diffuse support for the country. This is important because it impacts so many things in terms of the economy. We talked about the oil and gas and what that would mean, but we haven't talked about the food supply chain. Look at the moves and the agreement that China is making with the Soviet Union. And starving people to death is not, out of the reach in terms of being a political strategy. And I think Americans, what does that portend for our local economy as we see the increases in inflation in terms of less in the grocery basket, higher prices? What can we do in terms of the gasoline? Suspend that, for example.
I just got word that George P. Bush is speaking right now. Of course, he is a candidate for Attorney General, and we understand that he's speaking now. Let's go ahead and take that shot and see if we can pick up what he's saying.
So TBD on that, because we haven't seen any information on early voting or current day voting out of Harris County. We're just concerned about the irregularities and some of the glitches this morning. So we actually have a representative right now in the county courthouse in Harris County keeping an eye on things. But we feel like, notwithstanding Harris County and the other suburban counties outside of major cities in Texas, that we're going to do really well, and that most of rural Texas has yet to report. So similar to what happened for Ted Cruz, we feel like will happen for us late tonight. Sí, claro, cada vez. Tengo nervioso. In English, I'm nervous every election night, but this is for a greater cause. This is for Texans. This is making sure that we get rid of arguably the most corrupt official in Texas modern history. So that's why I'm in this race. I was, just privileged to be able to travel to most parts of the state to carry on our message to so many counties and so many Texans in this race. We are. Starr County, Zapata County. Zapata County was the county that went for Donald Trump this past cycle for the first time ever for a Republican. And it's all on the border security issues. So, look, I was the only candidate in this race that traveled from El Paso to Brownsville in 4 days, speaking with law enforcement officials, locally and county elected officials on their most important issue, an issue that they've been absorbing on behalf of the rest of the state, the rest of the country, for far too long. And so to not only show a good margin in Hidalgo, but we think we'll carry Cameron County and other counties as they begin to report, I think shows that our message works. And for the next 3 months, I'm going to carry that message to other parts of the state, that border security is so important, because the consequence of what we're seeing, whether it's violent crime, the high rate of fentanyl, that our current Attorney General is not addressing. He's sending out press advisories, but not actually sending lawyers and paralegals to take on these big issues on our border.
Commissioner, you've been saying this could be a long night. You're expecting a long night. How long are you talking about? Are you really thinking it could go until tomorrow morning or late tonight?
It could be early morning before we get a verdict, before we get a call. There's also discrepancies between what a lot of the major news outlets are reporting and the Texas Secretary of State. We're obviously going to go with the governmental entity that eventually certifies the election. But we've said at the outset this is going to be a late night. We've got our war room set up where we're calling people in county courthouses, making sure everything is above board. But I'm a fighter. I'm in this for as long as it has to be. And we got a team, a grassroots team in all parts of the state to help count those ballots and do what's necessary and exercise our legal rights if it has to come down to that.
Has anything surprised you as results start to come in? Have you been surprised by anything?
Yeah, I mean, we knew that it would be kind of delayed out of Harris County, but some of the rural counties usually that report do so by this point of the evening. But, we start to see a little bit break of the action in 11. I mean, to wait this long to see only early votes come in most of Texas where the estimate is about 43% of the total vote, of about 1.5 million being early vote, and just to be here pretty much for the majority of this evening and still waiting for actual votes from today, that's a little bit longer than usual. No, I credit the county officials that go through this process, that are taking very little pay to make sure that this process is done correctly, and that's what Texans want. But for the candidate, I can tell you I'm a little nervous and a little anxious. I think a lot of Texans want a verdict and move on and see who their candidates will be in the runoff. Well, with that, we'll adjourn and we'll be back out with some more news as it presents.
George P. Bush talking about some of the concerns that he has as a result of what's going on in the election count, including some of what's happening in Harris County, and what Judge and all of us here have indicated can be a problem going forward, trying to get an understanding of who's going to actually be representing the party going forward.
So what it says that this may take a while to be ferreted out.
That problem is going to be in place. Hey, we're going to take a little bit of a break here, a couple of minutes, and we'll be back. I want to make sure that we can get as many of the votes that we have coming in now, get them updated, see the actual numbers, and see what we can do with that, and make sure that we can go through all the numbers we have. And as we go through them, we'll talk about them a little bit. We'll do that after we take a couple of minutes of a break. We'll be right back.
So we're going to end at what time?
Welcome back. We've been looking at the races in this 2022 election cycle. We were looking at a lot of numbers, and if you had not been a part of what our conversation was earlier, the Texas Secretary of State has announced that Harris County will not be able to get their election numbers in certified by 7 o'clock tomorrow night. The Secretary of State, the election, they should have those votes in by a statutory deadline of 7 p.m. on Wednesday. And they're not going to do that because of problems with the Harris County voting process, and that is damaged ballot sheets that must be duplicated before they can be scanned by ballot tabulators at the central count location. And Judge Emmett was not holding back on his consternation about what's going on with Harris County. And George P. Bush kind of alluded to that as well. When he's there waiting for election results in a race that's so tight, for statewide, it is imperative that a county like Harris County with so many votes have their act together in a better way. Judge Emmett?
You waiting for somebody to respond?
I was waiting for you to respond.
Okay. Well, before I get to that, let me also say the Secretary of State's website is far behind any of the numbers that are rolling across the screen. So I don't know what's going on in Austin even, but their website reporting results is still way behind. As for Harris County, I think there could begin to be a political price to pay here, because there were a lot of Democrats and Republicans who were not happy with the fact that the people who were elected to run elections were summarily dismissed from that duty by the 3 Democrats on Commissioner's Court, who said we need an election administrator. And the county clerk and the tax assessor were both Democrats at the time. So it wasn't even a partisan move. It was some sort of a power grab. So now the person they've put in has messed up severely. I don't know how many elections now, Dr. Roddinghouse, everyone they've done. So at what point do you say, okay, this system is not good, or the person's not good, and you make a change? This is just not acceptable to either party. There's nothing partisan about this comment. I just can't imagine if I was sitting there waiting for an election where you got a runoff on a statewide race, particularly, and the biggest county in the state can't report the results in time to meet the statutory deadline.
Dr. Roddinghouse, your concerns about what the ripple effect may be of something like this that we're observing?
Yeah, like we said earlier, we're in a crisis moment in how local election officials handle these ballots, and everything needs to be done properly. Everything needs to be done fairly and cleanly. And I'm sure it is, but the problem is that the more of these problems that creep in, the harder it is to convince people that it's being done well. So it's just more ammunition, more fuel on this fire. And that's exactly what we don't need right now.
Yeah. Dr. Adams, you've been observing what's been going on here, and it seems to me that this whole thing started a couple of 3 years ago with the challenge of how well our elections can be run. It seems to me that this is something that not only is a problem for the state, but for our entire democratic process.
Yes, it's been ongoing, and I'm a proponent of an administrator if it can be done professionally. But clearly, I think what we're seeing here...
And Judge Emmett said that other counties have administrators.
They do, and that's the model. But again, you have to look at who the administrator is. If I don't do my job, I'd get fired.
Right.
All right. So they must get it right, because again, what we see these state election results, they may be hinging on what is happening in the largest county in the state of Texas.
We're going to
That's a disservice.
Yeah, it certainly is. And obviously we'll have reporters on this, and a lot of us will be paying a lot of attention to that, because tomorrow morning we still may not know the results of the Attorney General's race on who's going to be in the runoff. And that's going to be problem, and it's all the attention is going to be focused right on Harris County because their numbers aren't going to be in place. We have some numbers. Let's go ahead and look at the numbers that we have, and as we do so, we'll look at what we're going. By the way, Governor Abbott has now. Earlier, we were told that he was going to be coming out, but they've determined they're going to speak a little bit after 10 o'clock. So that's probably going to be within our newscast. It starts at 10 o'clock. It'll be available. So 69%. And we looked at earlier, Allen West, who came out really making a lot of noise early on. And really has done very little, backed off. And Mr. Hoffines had said that he was happy that he was able to move Greg Abbott's positions to the right, Judge Emmett. That's what Don Hoffines said, that that he's taking credit for being able to do that and with his 11%. So that's, you got to put the right spin on it, I guess. But that's the Republican primary there for the governor. And if you look at what's going on for the Democrats, Beto O'Rourke, 92%, and there's not going to be a change there. The AP has declared him a winner going forward. So now we're just going to be setting up for the general election going forward. And Judge Emmett, I don't know if you were part of I don't remember because I'm old and I'm forgetful, whether you were part of our conversation earlier about what kind of general election there's going to be between Governor Abbott and Beto O'Rourke. And Dr. Rottinghouse said that he expected that there was going to be national money and national, that Beto O'Rourke would be better served and have a better chance if he made it into a national election, brought it up to a national. What do you think about that, the way this is going to play out on the general election?
No, I think absolutely. Not only will the money flow in, but the issues will be national. Let's face it, you've got Mr. O'Rourke, who has already run for president. You've got Governor Abbott, who people think wants to run for president. And the strongest thing, just like the strongest thing the Democrats had while Donald Trump was president, was President Trump. The strongest thing Republicans have right now is President Biden. And so I just think the whole thing is going to be nationalized. And you'll hear a lot of maybe Texas-type refrains about the energy industry, because how many times have we heard in the last 2 days, if the Keystone Pipeline was in place, then we wouldn't have to be buying oil from Russia. Those are the kind of issues that we're going to hear over and over and over. So I think it will be nationalized. And I don't know how many minds are going to be changed between now and November, frankly, between those two.
Well, yeah, it seems to me that minds are baked. You know, when we talk about ideologies are baked into the cake, and it's just difficult to change people's minds along the way. It may be a turnout issue. It may not be a turnout issue, but with Beto O'Rourke having already lost a couple of times, the energy level that's going to be there's going to be a lot more energy on the Republican side, assuming things continue as they are. And we're not watching the president's State of the Union. He's finished that now, but I'd be curious to see what the reaction is to that. It'll be challenging no matter how you slice it. So anyway, let's look at some other numbers here as you may have them coming up. Jared, go ahead and push your magic button. We'll look at that. No issue at all there. Dan Patrick, I don't know why that's not called by somebody, but I'll call it. He will be representing the state. He'll be representing Republicans as a lieutenant governor candidate going forward there. And we looked at on the Democratic side. I know that there was Mike Collier and Carla Braley was in the hunt there a little bit, but now you look at these numbers now as they exist now with about 27% reporting, and that looks to be appropriate for the number of votes that are out there. We're talking about 500,000, 250, and then 161,000. That's why those numbers are reflective of that. Mike Collier may be the one who gets a chance to run against Dan Patrick, but as we said, there has not been a Democrat winning statewide for quite some time in the state. And it's going to be a challenge for anybody to do that this time around. So continuing to look, we looked at the Attorney General, where the big challenge is going to be who is going to be in the runoff. And that 42% now, can that change a little bit from the last time we looked with George P. Bush with 21% as opposed to Eva Guzman with 20%. However, we still know that the numbers in Harris County are askew. So this is going to be something we'll have to wait for a long time. Any shock that Louis Gohmert would finish as low as he did? I know a lot of people in the Republican Party that I've spoken to are really happy about that. Dr. Rottinghouse, are you surprised? I mean, yeah, after all, he is a sitting congressman, and people know him in his district, but certainly in a statewide. And he's one of those people that had been endorsed by President Trump, although not necessarily in this race because Paxton had that nomination.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, Gohmert got in the race late, didn't raise a lot of money, didn't raise the money he said he would raise to get in, but still got in, and he doesn't have a statewide presence. Yeah. Remember, George P. Bush and Eva Guzman both were top vote getters in 2018 and 2020, so they've got a statewide presence, but Louis Gohmert just didn't, so not surprising.
Right. All right, well, let's keep looking on at the other side of the coin as far as the Democratic Party is concerned, and we still see Joe Jaworski's come up a bit since we last saw, so he may be in a runoff with Rochelle Mercedes Garza, who has continued to have a big number of votes there. And Dr. Rottinghouse, you were talking about the fact that, across the state, Democratic, Hispanic vote getters tended to do quite well, and that's the case here at this point. So that's the way it's shaping up now. But as we said, it's a state number, and we'll have to wait until tomorrow afternoon or evening. If they're not going to get it in by tomorrow evening at 7 p.m., I don't know how long it's going to be before we can figure it out. And it's going to be a black eye for the nation, quite frankly. It's going to be one of the things that national media is going to be able to look at and say there's a problem with that part of our electoral process. So continue on. Let's see what other numbers we have out there. The land commissioner, now remember that George P. left that position to go ahead and do that. So Dr. Dawn Buckingham with that 43%. And she was a person who came out of there with endorsements from not only Donald Trump, but Senator Cornyn and Senator Cruz. So in that race, she came out with real heavy endorsements. And so, and still is, quite frankly, may not get to that 50%, but is doing really well and should be, considering the nominations, the support that she got from those other folk. On the Democratic side there with Sandra Gates Martinez at 31%, Jay Clayburgh. As we said, though, this is a challenge for anyone on the Democratic side to be able to win in the state, especially in a position that has been baked red for quite some time and is not likely to change going forward. Other races that we're looking at in terms of the numbers that have come in right now, the Harris County judge that we looked at earlier, this is on the Republican side, and I know that Alexandra Del Moral Miller seemed to get into it late. There was not a lot of buzz about her, although Judge Emmett, we had talked about the fact that she was really working behind the scenes to try to get some support for this race. She got Mattress Mac to come out and support her and a lot of other people. And for somebody who has not ever run before, she certainly cut with her background as a West Point and Harvard, and there are a lot of checks a lot of the boxes, except no political experience, but seems to be acquitting herself well, according to the early voting numbers, which are very early indeed.
Yeah, this is one of those races where you really do want to see what the election day, because campaigns have specific mechanisms for getting their early vote out, and then the election day doesn't always go the same way.
Right.
In the case of Alex Miller, though, I guess I would draw a bit of a comparison, even though I'll make it clear, Congressman Crenshaw endorsed Martina Lamont Dixon in this race. But a lot of what Alexandra Miller people had to say about her was that she reminded them of the late entry of Crenshaw into that congressional race. The same thing, though. She's got a military background, but in her case, her credentials are pretty impressive. I mean, not only did she go to West Point, not only did she serve two tours as a commanding officer in Afghanistan, but she got a law degree and an MBA from Harvard. That you look at that on resume and you go, okay, that's impressive. So the fact that she's gotten some endorsements, she's gotten a lot of grassroots support. I will say I'm a little surprised that she's leading, but it was always a question as to which two of those three we're going to get in the runoff. And if this holds, then that will be very interesting. And then the question becomes not only on the Republican side, but on the Democrat side, some of these races we've been watching, who's going to go vote in a runoff? Because sometimes those change dramatically. So it will be interesting to see. And I have to go back and make one comment that I wanted to make about the very same officials who have been howling the loudest about election integrity and election efficiency. Here we are in Harris County, and it's a disaster. So I've got that off my chest. I won't say anything else.
You know what, Judge, I wish you could stop straddling the fence on these things. That's what we want. We want honesty out here. Come on. It's absolutely true. We're told that Eva Longoria is going to be coming out and making a comment about what's going on here now. And of course, as soon as that comes out, it's something that we really, really want to hear. And so all eyes will be attuned to that. We'll see what happens. Dr. Ridinghouse, are you surprised at all by the as you call Alex Mueller? I don't know her, so I was calling her Alexandra, but she does have a lot of really good credentials. But as a first-timer in the race, seems to have come out of nowhere, at least right now, very early. And as Judge Emmett was talking about, parties have mechanisms to kind of make sure that those early vote numbers get out there. But nonetheless, I mean, that's a pretty good number. We've been seeing the numbers and the information about Ms. Lamont Dixon early on. We've been seeing a lot more of her than we have of Ms. Mueller.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, just driving around, you can see the presence is pretty significant. I also think the issue she's chosen, and that's crime, is going to be the most resonant. And whether she'll win or not, I think, is, like we said, determined by a lot of factors that are out of her control. But that's one thing that she can control. And I think that Democrats might be susceptible to the concerns about crime. So that could be her ace in the hole.
Yeah. We continue to look at the races that they come in and those numbers that we have. We continue to go ahead and pull those up on the screen. We've got some other numbers out there as well. This is Harris County Commissioner Precinct 2. This early voting number, so this is not beyond the initial tranche of numbers, so early voting only. And Jack Mormon, of course, formerly held that position and is hoping to get it back. And so he is making his way toward being able to go ahead and represent that the Republican Party to run for that Harris County Commission 2 spot. We'll see what happens with that. There's still a lot to be said about that. Adrian Garcia with a big number. You said you're surprised at that big a number?
Yeah, I thought Reasoner would run much better than what's revealed there.
Yeah. And it's interesting to note, too, I think that the precincts were drawn a little bit differently so that Adrian Garcia, in that race, it makes it a little bit more difficult for a Republican to win than it did before when Mormon was there. So we'll continue to watch that race and see what goes on. Obviously, these numbers, early voting numbers, Adrian Garcia's number is not going to change. He's going to be able to win that without a problem. We'll have to see what happens on the Republican side going forward. Here's Commissioner Precinct 4, Leslie Briones. This is the Democratic side. Benjamin Chu with 23%. Leslie Briones has been really aggressive campaigner, it looks like, and also somebody who has a judge and also has a pretty good pedigree as well. Either one of you familiar with her?
Yeah, given the endorsements and the support that I know that she had, I thought she would clear the hurdle of 50%, to be honest.
Well, yeah.
I'm not familiar with some of the other candidates.
Okay. Dr. Ridinghouse, you know?
Yeah, I assume we're in runoff territory here, though it's hard to know since we don't have enough in the kitty here to know for sure. But yeah, she's been a pretty active campaigner and definitely has got support across the board. So we'll see.
Judge Emmett, I know that it's a Democrat thing, but you have your pulse on the finger your finger on the pulse for a lot of things. So what do you know about this group of folk who are running for Precinct 4?
Well, I think this one is interesting, and I agree with Dr. Adams. I assumed that she would get over 50%, but she's had a bit of a hiccup here in the last couple of weeks because she became a judge when a judge accidentally resigned by announcing for another office. And Judge Hidalgo and the two Democrat county commissioners he tried to apologize, take it back, and get reappointed. And they said, no, you've announced for another office. You cannot be a judge. Well, Leslie Briones, Judge Briones, got appointed to that. Then she not only announced, but started running for county commissioner. But suddenly they didn't make her step down from the bench. And I think there were people in the Democratic Party who were going, now, wait a minute. What's fair about this? She got the job because you forced a judge to leave the bench because he announced he was running for something else. Why doesn't the same rule apply to her? And that's something she can overcome. But I think that little dent in the last 2 weeks may have had something to do with her falling below the 50%.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point. By the way, you see the Troy Nehls now, which is not a real shock. On the bottom of the screen, you can see that Troy Nehls declared the winner there. That was not a shock, 89% of the vote in his district, which is designed to be red, and now, as of the reconfiguration, is made even more red. So that's going to be something that Democrats are going to have to really struggle to try to make headway to get anywhere close to the way that they got the last election cycle. All right, let's keep looking here. State Representative, this is 132. Mike Schofield, 92%. Now, he's a guy who he was there before, is running again. 92%, not a shock, really. The fact that he is there. He lost and he won back the seat in 2018. He wants to get back again, and obviously he's on the way to doing that with the very few numbers reporting at this point. Chase Weston, there's a close contest here for the Democrat that wants to run in that district. Tied right now, but very few numbers coming in. Of course, again, this is attributable to Harris County numbers. So that's a problem, and it's going to be a problem for the rest of the evening. These numbers aren't going to be coming in very quickly. So, Jared, you were telling me that is Longoria about ready to say something? Do you know? Okay, so I'm being told that Isabel Longoria is going to be speaking in a bit about the problems that they're having in Harris County, and obviously the spotlight is going to be on them for quite some time. And as they're setting up that shot, we can say that you talked. Everybody here has said that if you were performing at the level that these performances have been, that you wouldn't be in the job anymore. So the question then is, Dr. Rottinghouse, do you think Commissioner's Court has the wherewithal and the stomach to be able to say, you know what, yeah, this isn't working, let's change?
And I can qualify that, first of all.
Oh,
I would like to say we would like to know where the glitches are, first of all, and do a comprehensive assessment before terminating.
Okay. Find out why you should shoot him before you shoot him.
There you go.
Dr. Rottinghouse, your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, all eyes are on Texas right now. We're the first primary in the nation, so this definitely is a high-profile mess up. And I think Dr. Adams is right. We'd like to know why, what's the cause of it. But regardless of the cause, it's still the case that this has got to be done right. I'm, though, in favor of doing it well. And this is something the election officials across the country confront in trying to do a job under stressful circumstances and very quickly. So I think we can cut them some slack, but at the same time, the fact that it keeps happening is problematic. So I think Commissioner's Court is going to take a really close look at what's going on.
I haven't heard anything. I don't know if any of you have heard anything about any problems at the polls as it relates to monitors, election monitors, or any of the new laws that were put into effect about the polling places. I haven't heard of any issues. Have any of you?
I haven't heard.
Okay. So I'm looking at this release now from the Secretary of State, looking if there's anything else more to this. I'm curious to know what Ms. Longoria says about what kind of help they're getting from the state. The state has made it clear that they're ready to come in and, quote, help. And that goes right into the trend of what's been going on in Austin, that Harris County has been the focal point of a lot of the laws. It seems that a lot of the laws that were put through, and Judge, you can correct me, because I know you will, if I'm wrong, that some of the things that were put into place, or laws, were put into place based upon things that were taking place in Harris County that were deemed to be disruptive or not in the best interest of the electoral process. Is that true?
Well, with the excuse of the pandemic, Harris County put into effect 24-hour voting, drive-through voting, things that were not allowed under the current state law at the time. And the problem with that is, if the counties don't all follow the same rules, then somebody could easily say, well, wait a minute, I'm being disenfranchised because my county doesn't allow voting the way that county does. So that's why you have to have a statewide standard. And people can argue over what's the right thing to do or not the right thing to do. But Harris County just sort of thumbed their nose at the state and said, we know better than you on how to do elections. Well, it hadn't turned out that way. But I will say that an election administrator, it's not just the county, they created it. But once created, I believe it's the fact that both party chairs have to go along with replacing an election administrator, because that keeps it from being which is a good thing, it keeps it from being a partisan matter to where one party can't just say, well, we want to get rid of that election administrator. But, in this case, it would take both party chairs and whoever else, I don't know who else is involved in the decision.
Yeah, I want to respond. I agree with Judge in terms of the standard, but wouldn't you think during the pandemic that Harris County would be a whole lot different from Loving County in terms of what they have having to deal with? Yeah.
For example, I don't want to belabor the point.
Right.
There was a lot of conversation about you only had one drop-off point for your mail-in ballots in all the counties. Yeah. Well, that's just not true. You drop them in any mailbox. They're called a mail-in ballot for a reason. And so the idea of having a place where you bring a batch of votes and drop them off, that was actually first put in place by Stan Stannard when he was county clerk, because he said a lot of, shall we say, elderly voters who were voting absentee or using a mail-in ballot wanted to bring them down to the courthouse. And so they'd bring them down, and you'd have to go outside and put them in a mailbox because they were technically a mail-in ballot. So that's how that all came about. But somehow it got sold. If you remember, there was great consternation over whether or not the Postal Service could perform.
Yes,
yes. But no, in Harris County, you could drop it in any mailbox. And so that's one where they created a narrative that may or may not have been correct.
Right.
Well, and we've had those conversations, and clearly it's going to be around the voting irregularity / the voting security is a challenge going forward. At least the narrative is there now going forward. Jared, can you give me an update on what's going on with Ms. Longoria? Are we set up there? What's happening with her? Oh, okay. Is this a live shot we're looking at now? Okay, election headquarters now. And she's set to speak any minute, I'm told, and the cameraman is there. As you can see, this is live as we're watching. The camera's getting set up there, and we'll see where they're going to be. The microphone is set up there. We're waiting for her to step to, and there's a lot of interest in what she's going to have to say, clearly. So as soon as she steps in front of the mic, we'll go back to that. Jared, I want to just keep an eye on that for me, and when she comes back, we'll go straight to that. But I know we had some state rep races that if we can get to those, I'd like to do that. We're going to be with you for another 15 minutes or so here. And step aside. Don't want to be competing with the 10 o'clock news, although we know that you want to stick with us as opposed to going over the 10 o'clock news. But we do have some other races. If we can get to those, if we can pull those up, I'd love to be able to take a look, because I know with some of the state rep races, especially some of those where we have some state reps who are deciding to step down, and there's a big race for those to take over. Garnett Coleman, one of those. Jim Murphy, one of those. Here's Harold Dutton. That seems to be a lot closer than I would expect. Yes. District 142 with Harold Dutton. He's been there for a long time, and you said there are a lot of people within the party who really want to see him out.
No, not necessarily. But you got a younger element, all right, in terms of that. And Harold has taken some kind of, I'd say, difficult or challenging positions in terms of dealing with education in some of the school districts. And he's fielding an opponent in the last rounds of election.
And he hadn't had that in the past, not very much. Now, that's very early numbers, by the way. Remember, we're still talking about Harris County.
Yeah.
So the numbers are very early. But let's go forward to see what other numbers we have. District 147, those numbers are still very early, 53% for Damian Thaddeus Jones in District 147. And let's see that's
Garnett's seat, but it's a Democratic seat.
Yeah, it's going to be a Democratic seat. So this is the numbers. Okay, Jolanda Jones, which has only very few numbers in, but Jolanda Jones with 46%, very high name recognition for her positions in various leadership with state, city council and HISD. Danielle Keys Best, endorsed by the Chronicle, not doing as well. Reagan Flowers, who's HCC trustee, appointed to that position, has run before, still trying to hopefully make a runoff. Very low numbers there as well. So there's a lot to be said about what we have going forward to wait for overnight and into tomorrow. A lot of these candidates. It's unfair for them.
It is.
Let's go to Ms. Longoria to see what she has. Yeah.
All right, so we've got our second announcement of the night. It's election night. It's about 9:45 out here, and we're seeing boxes roll back. So those voting locations are already rolling back to our drop-off site. Looks like we've had about 155 of those locations already deliver their equipment. So that's the ballot boxes, the scans, their ballot bags, all of those live votes to the drop-off location, which means they're getting loaded up on trucks and being delivered here every 15 minutes as those trucks get rolling. We've got another 144 locations that have confirmed that they are closed down, packed up, and heading to those drop-off locations. So between 10 and 1 a.m. is when we see the most ballot boxes come back. Again, as those judges are finishing the voters that were in line, closing down their polls securely, doing their chain of custody forms, and all of the other procedures we have in place to ensure those ballots are coming back to us in the safest way possible. So you hear the trucks behind me. You can see that we've had I think we've had 4 ballot boxes hit here at the location, which means we'll have our next early vote results, those next couple of boxes, out here in just a couple of minutes. Happy to take any questions on where we're at for the night.
I think people are just, whether where our numbers, it's probably going to pause. It's frustrating. I mean, you see it in social media, you hear from people.
And we see it every election. This is actually very typical for Harris County. It's a big county. It takes a long time for our judges to pack up their equipment securely, safely, get on the road to those drop-off locations, which is what the judges asked us to do so that they could have something closer to them, and then bring it back here safely. This is honestly a very typical and average election night in Harris County. I know we're used to instantaneous information, which is why we get those early vote results up right at 7 p.m. And then again, as those results are running in, those boxes closed securely is when we're reporting results for the night.
You say it's a typical night in Harris County, but you have new equipment, you have both party chairs conveying to us they're completely frustrated. A new plan has been in place. I know for a fact that they've been conversing with you for months to make sure you have no hiccups. And yet, on a typical night, you're telling the state you're not going to be able to count all the votes by 7 p.m. How do you say that is really typical?
Harris County has never said we're not counting the results. Got some trucks behind me. Harris County has never said that we're not counting the results tonight.
No, by tomorrow night, by 7 p.m. to the state.
Right. Harris County has never said that we're not able to return results over tomorrow night. We had a meeting earlier with the Republican and Democratic parties and the Secretary of State. Those parties were nervous because of the new legal implementations, the civil penalties that could be excised upon them. They said, we're nervous with SB 1, we're nervous about getting sued. They've been fighting with each other all day, and they said, what are our options? And we said, hey, we're happy here to serve you. Let us know. We'll be rolling with those election night results all night long.
So let me ask the question this way then. Will Harris County have all the votes tabulated tomorrow night by 7 p.m.?
We're going to have election results tabulated by 7 p.m. tomorrow night, and we're finishing up that paperwork throughout the week, just like we would do any week, because now we've got these results coming in, and as you all know, we have the provisional ballot deadline and the mail ballot deadline here in the next 7 days. So, again, very typical that here in Harris County and across the state, We have an extended period. What you see tonight are the unofficial election results, just like any election, and we work to get all those T's crossed and those I's dotted as the days count.
So all the votes will be tabulated tomorrow night by 7 p.m.
I think we should be very cautious about what you're saying.
No,
the tabulation and canvass deadline is 10 days from now. That is the law that we have to comply with the state of Texas.
So the 7 p.m. deadline tomorrow that you said, no, that's not an issue then. So will everything be counted tomorrow in Harris County by 7 p.m.?
So I think this is the confusion in law where the Secretary of State and the parties are trying to throw some confusion out there. What do you mean by tabulated? Because that's a very specific legal definition.
So when will Harris County have its votes tabulated tomorrow?
To have all your votes tabulated and canvassed is a 10-day deadline. And that's what we're seeing in Harris County. Our procedures, we're getting all the election we're getting all the election boxes back tonight within 24 hours. That's what we have to do. Make sure all that equipment is getting back to us. And over the next week, as people return provisional ballots, as we deal with those second page and paper issues, we return a final canvass and tabulated vote to the parties as we're supposed to by that canvass deadline.
How does this damage happen? Were workers properly trained?
Don't know about damage that you're talking about. Again, Harris County is the only county in Texas with 2 pieces of paper. So we've got voters who are confused, they're nervous about putting in their ballots, and we've got workers who are saying, I don't know what to do sometimes with passes. It's in our manual. We've provided an election technology center with over 60 tech workers that were on the phone all day today answering questions. What we tell our election judges is if you get nervous at the polls, if voters get nervous at the polls, just put those votes in that supplemental emergency slot so that we can take care of it here at Central Count. And that's what our judges said.
One other county does do this, and they haven't had any issues. Tarrant County does.
Tarrant County does what?
They use these double ballot issues as well.
Fantastic. I encourage you to reach out to Tarrant County and see how they're replicating ballots tonight.
I mean, shouldn't we be doing that as a county? Because they don't have ballots that are damaged.
I guarantee you Tarrant County is replicating ballots tonight. And there's nothing, the word damage is a word the Secretary of State
they're not
used.
having to delay their ballots.
And neither are we. We are replicating ballots as we have to.
Do you feel like how much of what the Secretary of State says do you think is factual, or how much of the facts do you disagree with, or what they say you disagree with? Do you feeling like politics playing a role, or do you think it's an actual accurate representation of what's going on?
I'm the nonpartisan election administrator running this election, and I do not have a concern. What I am seeing is political parties and Secretary of State who met about their own fears, about what they perceived was going on with the elections, and putting out information before the polls even closed without even conversing with us about what that meant. So what I'm saying is, as the nonpartisan election official of Harris County, I am not concerned this evening or any time about our ability to get these ballot boxes in tonight and these election results reported.
So Mario was saying so far they've only released the early votes. When can we expect the other votes to come in?
Yeah, as you see, we've got these ballot boxes right behind us. They're tabulating them right now, and I'm sure I can go check on those results.
But doesn't Harris County have to report the election result 24 hours after the polls close?
So we are reporting election results, and so that's the contention, is we are reporting election results. You saw the early vote results posted. You're going to see our first election night results posted here in the next 10 or 15 minutes.
But all election votes by Harris County have to be voted, or have to be counted by 7 p.m.
All ballot boxes have to be returned to Harris County within the next 24 hours.
You're confident that Harris County, or are you going to be able to comply with the law, I think? Whatever.
Harris County is currently counting all ballots for early vote. We have posted those results. Harris County is currently counting all the ballots for Election Day and are posting those results. I don't know what more to tell you.
We've been listening to Isabel Longoria, who is the administrator for Harris County, and quite frankly, there's a little back and forth, and she basically does not agree with what the Secretary of State has said about the damaged ballot sheets. But I also noticed when she said that this is very much like any other Harris County election, I saw Judge Emmett's head almost pop. So, Judge, is this like almost any other election?
Well, let's see. The first election that I was involved in Harris County was 1974. What I just saw was probably the most embarrassing performance I've seen. For her to say that this is a typical election night, no, it's not. We've always been able to start getting results usually an hour and a half after the polls close. And sometimes, yes, they dribbled into the next day, but to have nothing else counted yet is totally unusual. I think that the two experts here with us will agree with that. And for her to just keep creating her own story, it's just not true. But the other thing, I hope not many voters were watching that. Aside from what she said, did the operation going on behind her give you any great feeling of security? Not at all. What was going on? Doors were slamming. People were rolling boxes back and forth. No, that was I thought a horrible performance on her part.
The optics were not good.
Dr. Adams and Dr. Ridinghouse, I'll let you go ahead and your comments about what you saw.
I agree with the judge. The optics were not good in that case. And I think it was a play when Mario were asking those questions in terms of the canvas and in terms of what the state mandates, didn't answer the question in terms of based upon what you read us from the Secretary of State's position. Right.
It sounded like the Secretary of State put out what the Secretary of State wanted to put out,
right.
And it said and attributed it to Harris County election officials have indicated to our office that the delay is due to damage. Ms. Longoria she said she did not really go along with that, at least from my perception. Dr. Ridinghouse, your take on what we just saw.
Yeah, I've been watching elections for as long as Judge Emmett in Harris County, but we almost always have numbers by now, even if they are sluggish or even if a couple of the particular precincts are slow to report. I think the bigger question here is just the ongoing dispute between state election officials and local election officials. And I think what we don't want is this to escalate into a full-scale war between Harris County and the state. We've already seen enough of this, and that's created all this sort of confusion and, changes to the ballot. So I don't think we want more of this. I think we want to resolve this. And I'm afraid that this and the way that she's talking about it aren't necessarily going to do that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. At this point, there seems to be a real disconnect between what's going on. And of course, Ms. Longoria is still answering questions. And I can guarantee you that what she is saying is going to be a part of our reports coming up starting in about 7 minutes on KPRC on our channel. And certainly you can continue to watch live stream as far as the election results. We'll continue to populate those on our screen throughout the newscast as well. But this has been an interesting night. No huge surprises, really. We still, that we can say, okay, this is definitely a surprise because we're still waiting on numbers from Harris County to come in so we can really say that there are surprises. And of course, we're still going to be looking at the Attorney General's race. Ken Paxton clearly in place to go ahead and be a part of a runoff. Who's going to be running against him is still yet to be seen. So we'll be watching those numbers as well as many others that we've been able to see. And what kind of impact former President Trump has had on any of these races across the board, what I've referred to as the Trumpublicans, which are continuing to really play a role in what's going on, not only in our state, but in the rest of the country as well. And as this first primary of the nation, a black eye from the opinion of the experts here tonight about how this has been done in Harris County at any rate. So with that, we're going to let you go and watch our newscast coming up in just a few minutes. Thank you to Dr. Adams. Thank you, Dr. Ridinghouse. And thank you, as always, Judge Emmett, for being here and being able to add your insight. And I hope your head's going to be okay after we settle down the rest of the night. I will tell you all that I was watching him when she was saying some of the things she was saying. It was really good. I'm sorry you didn't see the split screen because it was really good. Thank you all for being a part of this. We always enjoy being able to provide you the option to be able to get the election results that are available. And hopefully you've been able to get some of that. And hopefully next time Harris County can be a little bit better and we can give you more information. You saw some of our reports from Fort Bend County and some of the rest from around the rest of the state. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what's in place and what is starting to be in place for the state of Texas going forward. So thank you, everybody. We appreciate you watching. Look forward to seeing you again next time on KPRC, on any of our platforms along the way. Our 10 o'clock news is coming up in 5 minutes. Hopefully you'll tune in for that coming up in just a bit. Good night, everybody.
Good to see you.